you for sunshine. Thank you for rain. Thank you for joy. Thank you for pain. It's a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day. Thank you for sunshine. Thank you for rain. Thank you for joy. Thank you for pain. It's a beautiful day. See it from here. This I gotta switch because boom, 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 boom. Perfect. And now from here.
Up for an adventure?
Always.
Public opinion and public perception, we know no matter what happens, it could come out tomorrow that they absolutely did some dirty to Drake, violated him, did whatever they did, and people are still going to say, yo, but you can't do that in rap.
You are a hot pocket.
So it doesn't matter.
That's not what the lawsuit is saying.
I'm just saying we don't know the nuances of this contract with UMG.
You are a sloppy hot pocket.
Had he won, this would probably not be happening. No one really
You're going
thinks...
off of ifs, though. Like, let's not speak from if this happened, if that happened, if...
He got the extra sauce dripping from his hot pocket.
This is just a straight-up defamation case when you asked Kendrick to do that, knowing he's on UMG. And I would like...
Ask Kendrick to do it.
Call me... Or you think Tupac said that? Sorry.
Drizzy's personal hot pocket.
He asked Kendrick to call him a...
Yes, in Taylor Made.
I don't remember him asking Kendrick to call him a...
Just a dumb hot pocket. There is no way Maul can be this deep in the Drake fanboy pocketbook. He is living in his hot pocket at this point. You can find Maul at any grocery store near you in the Drizzy aisle, looking for his hot pocket. How does someone whose literal brother is the Rockefeller co-founder, someone with direct ties to the foundation and true essence of hip-hop, ends up aligning with a corporate machine that has absolutely no respect for the integrity of rap? What is wrong with you? You look so corny. Yo, I'm serious. How do you go from being rooted in real rap culture to becoming the ultimate brown noser? You're a bootlicker at this point, a cheerleader. You do all that for Aubrey. What credibility do you even have left to ride this hard for this guy? It's embarrassing at this point. This toilet bowl of a podcast with Maul straight up stanking up the air from all the cheek licking he's doing for Drake. He's doing a lot of cheek licking. He does that for Aubrey, for Obs. It started off when
It's a
Rory
beautiful
actually sounded like the
day.
same one. Because if you remember correctly, Rory sided with Drake initially
It's a
when Drake
beautiful
filed the
day.
petition against UMG about the payolas and the botting and all that against Not Like Us. Drake felt like UMG did this strategically so they didn't have to cash him out when it was time to renegotiate their contract. Rory stated that he initially backed Drake's petition against UMG and Spotify because if Kendrick was really out here running bots for Not Like Us, or if UMG blackballed Drake over his future contract negotiations, it'd expose the dirt within the music industry and help with future artists.
Drake was trying to save music and save all the artists. I never said that. Even if he is doing this for selfish reasons, which he may be, because I think that petition could be very good for all artists. If UMG has to go through depositions, open their books, there could be some bad practices of how songs are manipulated between DSPs and major.
I honestly don't know why Rory would think that. I get where he's coming from, but this is Drake. If there was things happening in the industry like that, you can definitely place a bet that Drake's name is written all over that as well. So snitching on Kendrick is snitching on himself.
Now, that petition is gone, and what has replaced it is just a straight-up defamation case for Drake to UMG, and at this point, I am taking myself out of the objective column. Okay. You can't do a defamation case in a rap battle.
But then, like everybody else with a sane brain, Rory switched gears, saying Drake's new defamation lawsuit is a no-no for hip-hop.
With that said, you're still a rapper, and there's still rapper rules. This is just a straight-up defamation case when you asked Kendrick to do that, knowing he's on UMG. And I would like...
Ask Kendrick to do it.
Call me... Or you think Tupac said that? Sorry. He straight up said... And that's where, again...
He asked Kendrick to call him a...
Yes, in Taylor Made.
I don't remember him asking Kendrick to call him a...
Mo, you are such a fucking dumbass. I don't even need to use any intellectual words on you. You're just a stupid. You're pathetic. Maul, if you don't
Dumb
pick up your
nigga.
pocketbook and quit dropping it around on the floor for Drake to get it, this is getting ridiculous.
Tupac was telling Kendrick Lamar that he should call Drake the ghost of Pac. Or he's still alive. Maybe he recorded in Cuba. I don't know.
Why are you acting oblivious? Why are you trying to change the narrative like no one heard this man use an AI of Tupac begging Kendrick to take the bait of him talking to younger girls? Where were you at? I know you know the bar. You study. This is your man's, right? You study this guy. There's no way you didn't hear that bar. I'm pretty sure you listen to that record every single day, a million times the way you guzzle Drake. There's no way you don't even know what he's talking about. Look at your face. That's a lying man right there. Look at that blank stare. I know a liar when I see one.
Let's say Kendrick lost, and Kendrick ends up suing UMG because Drake said that he's
It's
a
a
woman beater and that his son's
beautiful
ouch.
day.
If a company publishes a song or does something that directly violates my contract I have with them, I'm not mad at any artist that is suing that company.
There's no way you believe in yourself. You know you sound ridiculous. Look at you. You look like a liar. You look like a professional liar. You look delusional. Malulu. My name is Malulu. From here on out, it's Malulu. Malulu or Malulu. Maul over here pretending to play the unbiased card, trying to save face for Drake snitching, talking about how he support any artist going up against corporate. Like we don't see through you. You're just out here caping for Drake and trying to make it look noble.
Now all of a sudden we want morals and integrity in rap, right? That's now all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, you can't sue that. You can't do this with rap. Niggas do everything else with rap. Niggas put out songs with niggas that can't rap. Push songs and music with niggas that can't rap.
Give them $13 million deals.
All day. We can do all of that. But when it comes down to the artist saying, I'm going to protect my contract, y'all did not honor what's in my contract. Y'all violated my contract.
You're absolutely right. Let me tell you why. Because everything that you're sitting there yelling and getting all flustered over because they're hurting your man's feelings is what your man was doing his whole career to other artists. Let's not forget why everybody jumping him right now. Let's not forget why Drake's getting packed out by every artist in the industry right now. Let's not forget what your mans just did to content creators. Even though he's not suing them, the way he threw them under the bus and hated on their bag is exactly why everyone don't like Drake in the industry. He uses that tactic that you're so flustered over, but for whatever reason, you want to be the armor for Drake. You want to be his shield and protect him. Act oblivious and act like he's the only one being picked on. This is insane.
Public opinion and public perception, we know no matter what happens, it could come out tomorrow that they absolutely did some dirty shit to Drake, violated him, did whatever they did, and people are still going to say, yo, but you can't do that in rap.
But that's not
So it doesn't matter.
That's not what the lawsuit is saying. No, the lawsuit is saying it's a defamation case. You supported an artist saying terrible things about me that aren't true. That's what they're saying.
And honestly, bro, like, you see how you guys like to spin narratives and change topics and form your own story pattern? This isn't even that kind of lawsuit anymore for you to be bring up the bots and the payolas and all the salty shit you believe that Universal did to Drake. This is a defamation of character lawsuit. This is about straight up not like us defaming him. This isn't about what you're talking about. So stop blending the two. First of all, Drake was lame for both, in my opinion. He was. However, if it was the other suit, he would have got a little leeway with that, especially if he would have caught some shiesty shit behind the scenes. Because, I mean, hey, get your bag, get your money. If somebody's stealing from you, get it. You feel me? If it's the corporation, get it. I've never been against anybody that had to sue a corporation. Corporations, we already know how that go. They steal from the people. However, that's not this anymore. This is a defamation case. You guys gotta understand what that is. He's mad because he got bullied. This is battle rap, bro. This is battle rap. The whole objective is to bully. What is you talking about, bro?
Drake even said on the shop, I study rap battles for a living. And I believe him, because there has been times when Drake has mocked people up in rap battles. You study this for a living, you know what a rap battle is. It's by definition, who can defame each other worse.
And the thing is, Meek Mill wouldn't do that. That's the part that y'all don't understand. That's where culture comes from. I'm not about to sue this man because I lost. I gotta take my L like a man. The hell I look like suing this man just because he won his war? I'm the one that warred up. I lost. The hell I look like suing for losing now? That's insane logic.
But at what point do you just save face?
But save face so that the label doesn't pay for the shit that they violated?
But you keep saying that the label violated when his suit is not that the label violated anything. His suit is that they allowed Kendrick to say mean things about him.
Again, that's what we know so far.
It's so cringe to watch. And I usually like cringe shit. I mean, my content is cringe, damn it. But this right here is a different kind of cringe.
We don't know exactly what they violated. Like, yes, it's a defamation suit, but where did that come in at? Like, where did they do that at? Now, we know, oh, yes, you published a song with somebody saying things about me. You posted my home on DSP's predator markers above my home. That could be in this contract with shit like that. A label cannot they cannot allow that to happen. I'm just saying, we don't know the nuances of this contract with UMG.
Bro, what the hell are you talking about? What is your argument here? You're so corny. Like, with your stupid ass pink ass hat. And I like the color pink, don't get me wrong. Some pink hues on a shirt is dope. But that pink hat with that light blue shirt, Easter's not here yet. Looking like a giant Easter basket.
Everyone is looking at it nuts because had he won, this would probably not be happening.
Like, let's not speak from if this happened, if that happened, if that. Let's speak to what happened, and then speak to the fact that, again, you've never seen this contract with UMG. I've never seen this contract with UMG. Most people online have never seen this contract with UMG.
Why? Because it makes sense. You act like we saying if we won $1 million. We've seen it before. We've seen Drake win battles before. We've seen him annihilate careers before. And he says the most outlandish and harshest things to these people. And he goes on his merry way. He doesn't even think twice about UMG doing anything behind the scenes. Because whatever he thinks UMG is doing behind the scenes, they've been doing before he was even an artist. This isn't nothing new. He wasn't tripping then. He hasn't tripped this whole entire time. He wasn't tripping last year or the year prior.
I'm just saying, just think about it from the standpoint that if his lawyers, his team, feels like there's a violation of their client's contract with this company and we're moving forward with this lawsuit, there's some validity to that.
He wasn't tripping when he had that big beef with Kanye West just a couple of years ago, the whole CLB versus Donda rollout. He wasn't tripping earlier this year when Kanye did that interview.
You know, it's like we saving the world. Like, you take Drake and Lucian out, that just alters everything because that's such a control thing they had, the algorithm, the way that they work together to fix the numbers.
He wasn't tripping when Kanye outed him on that Sacramento stage. And right after Kanye did that, they 5150'd him and put him on psych meds. This has been an issue. So to act like all of a sudden you want to feel bad for him, this is exactly why he's being eliminated. He had too many yes men around him. No real authentic OGs around him at all. And when you have too many people telling you yes, 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 you start to only see yourself. You shouldn't want to only see yourself. How do you grow? How will you ever grow if you are the only person in the room? No one's there to coach you. Everyone needs a life coach. That's why they say you should take therapy or counseling or whatever the case is, not just for mental health, but if you don't have anybody to coach you, you can't have a whole bunch of pocketbooks like Maul lying around. You can't. Hot pockets.
You can't do that to your artist. There can't be no defamation. So it probably broke the contract. But again, people are looking at it like you went into a battle where defamation is the entire thing.
And again, I can't, because no matter what I say on the situation, it's going to look like I'm just riding for my guy.
See, and I can't stand people like this. Instead of understanding the issue within you, you try to put it off on everybody else. Like, oh, I can't even say anything because you guys are going to say I'm sticking up for my guy. How about because you've been in podcasts for how many years and you're supposed to be a journalist, why don't you put your career before you and show professionalism and do these unbiased takes? If you don't want to envision Drake, call him something else. I don't know, call him Aubrey, something. So you don't see your mans, I guess, the way you like to call him, your mans. Just because he's your friend doesn't mean you got to be dumb with him, especially if you're on a podcast. It's easy to say, I don't think that he should have done this. He probably should have took this route, but I'm not the artist. You could have easily said it like that. I mean, Academics even says that. I actually want to put that out there. I will have to say Maul is worse than Academics, and I know a lot of people hate Ak, but Ak is just more popular than Maul, so we see him more. He's just on everyone's timeline more, so you're more annoyed with him every day because he's more famous than Maul. He has more action than Maul when it comes to being retweeted or sourced. But I would have to say Maul is worse than Academics because of the fact that he can't even put out an unbiased opinion. I've heard Academics say, I don't know why Drake did this, but I'm not the artist.
Yo, the reason why Drake's hate is because of Ak. No, it ain't because of me. I'm not filing lawsuits. I'm not doing these things. Like, if you leave it up to me, Drake would disappear for a little bit and just chill out. You know what I mean? Like, but that's me. Like, I can't tell the artist what to do. In reality, I think at some point, the duck lips and the random mirror selfies has to stop, and Drake has to try to answer to this himself, right? This is one of the reasons I don't talk to him about the lawsuit. I've never asked him about the lawsuit. I asked him if it was real once, and the lack of answer, man. Other than that, I don't want to know his intentions, right? Because I don't want to be the person regurgitating what he's telling me. He should tell the world.
And we all still know that he's the biggest Drake muncher ever, but he still says an unbiased take when he really doesn't have the answer, and it's too ugly to even stick up for. Maul's gonna sit here and try to put it off on the audience. Look at him. Look at this bozo. You guys are just gonna say it's my man, so I don't even want to. Like, shut the fuck up, bro. Shut the hell up, man.
But what I'm saying is, you can't look at it like that, because if it's essentially, we know that he's in a negotiation with this company, right? They're probably one of their biggest artists ever. He's probably asking for things, and that we can't even fathom. Probably one of the biggest deals we will ever see an artist get from a label, right? Insert rap battle.
Here go Maul over here again, polluting the room with his nonstop Drake praise, acting like this lawsuit is some revolutionary move for the culture. If Drake's the thirstiest rapper alive, then Maul is straight up dehydrated of a podcaster. The man's looking parched. He needs a drop of Drake's validation.
Here's another artist that this label is publishing and distributing. If he knows some things that they did on that side that will directly, one, violate his contract, hurt his brand, and now interrupt his negotiation leverage in his dealings with them.
Nah, Drake couldn't handle the L, so instead of taking it like a grown man, he threw a tantrum because Daddy Lucian Grange didn't play favorites like he expected. He's big mad because UMG didn't bend the knee this time. I didn't even try to rhyme that, but that was kind of clean. Because UMG didn't bend the knee. Oh, that was corny. And now Drake's out here convinced they must have done for Kendrick what they usually did for him. Payola and all that. Drake is not exposing some deep industry secret that we all didn't already know. He's just salty because the favoritism train didn't stop at his station. It didn't stop this time. It just kept on going. He missed it.
Because this is a rap battle, y'all feel like he shouldn't do that? He should just say, oh, nah, I'm going to take the loss. I'm going to lose out on money that most people will never see in their life, and I'm just going to let it be what it is.
Not you bragging about another man's pockets. You trying to flex another man's wealth against us? He over here trying to flex another man's wealth. I never respected people like this.
So either way, all that money or stake or percentage that he is owed by UMG is now gone, and he's probably going to go independent. So at that point, why don't you protect your rapper brand, your fan brand, instead of your legal brand, and move the fuck on?
Basically, in other words, shut the fuck up, Drake, and go sit down somewhere. Make people miss you. Do not go through with this lawsuit. It is going to fuck your whole credibility as an artist up. You going through with this lawsuit, it's cementing everything. And you're just going to look like another bitter Karen who complains to HR.
Again, you say protected. I feel like this is him protecting his brand. You keep saying rapper. This is one of the biggest artists in the world.
You know you sound ridiculous, Maul. Look, that's the face of a conflicted man. He doesn't want to say this, but he know he has to. He has to protect Aubrey at all times. He said, I have to do this for the Hot Pockets.
Okay, so let me ask you something. Do you think that Taylor Swift's label will allow another artist to put her home up on DSPs, a picture of her home up with sex offender markers above her home?
No.
Okay, now you comparing a man to a white woman. I mean, I see Drake as that, but not you comparing them to a white woman. But hey, let me just say this real quick. Taylor Swift didn't sue Kanye West, though. When Kanye infamously dissed Taylor in the track, also had her sleeping with him in a bed. She talked big shit on Twitter, but she never sued him. Taylor got more heart than Drizzy at this point. Mariah Carey didn't sue Eminem. She took the booth. And respectively so, she gassed Eminem. I mean, that's one of her biggest hits, if you want to be honest. Even though Mariah Carey's part black, but still, she took to the booth herself. I mean, if you want to go the white way, we could keep going. Hillary Duff and Lindsay Lohan didn't even sue each other, and they had the ultimate battle They hated each other. They was dissing each other everywhere, and they didn't sue each other. Britney Spears, NSYNC, they never sued Eminem, and he used to drag their names in the mud. They all got more heart than Drizzy. This is just a no-no. What he's doing is a no-no. It is lame. Since you want to bring up Taylor, Taylor mind her own damn business. Beyonce gets dragged all the fucking time. All the time. When Lil Wayne and Jay-Z was throwing jabs, Lil Wayne dissed Beyonce. Jim Jones has dissed Beyonce. She didn't sue. She didn't sue. Let's just keep it real here. Kendrick Lamar's fiance has every right to sue. Not even Kendrick don't even need to sue. Whitney could sue. You defamed Whitney completely. She can sue, and she's not. Drake has defamed Meg. She could sue, and she didn't. Meg can sue Tory Lanez. She didn't. Meg also didn't press charges against Tory Lanez. California did. I mean, we could keep going, bro. You looking real lame. Remy Ma didn't sue Nicki Minaj, and Nicki Minaj dragged her ass. Nicki Minaj didn't sue Megan Thee Stallion when Meg basically straight up called her man a PDF. It's only Drizzy. It's literally only Drizzy Drake. I think Maul needs to just pick up his pocketbook and take back his hot pocket and walk away. No more hot pockets for Drake. No more pocketbook for Drake. Because you looking crazy. Maul will be the downfall of this channel, of this podcast. Rory needs to really consider doing a side gig, his own solo podcast, kind of like what Charlemagne does. Allegedly, they reached out to LiAngelo Ball to come on the Rory and Maul podcast for them to discuss his new hit. You know, that his song going viral called Tweaker. So allegedly, LiAngelo's team emailed them declining their offer and also took shots at Maul in the classiest way.
So we were trying to have LiAngelo Ball on the podcast, and we just now in real time got an email back from someone on our team. A quick note that LiAngelo Ball is passing, but they did say they liked what Rory said about it.
What did I just tell you before we started recording?
I see why he would pass and probably go to people that are saying great things about the record, but I think
that's the problem.
That's the good content, in my opinion.
It's the good content, but like I told you on those 2 episodes we talked about it, you OD shit on that record. Like, I didn't feel like
That
the
record
shit
is
you
trash.
took was necessary.
That shit sound like Chat GPT. Hot Boys.
Wait, Damaris, I think I figured it out.
What's up?
You hate LiAngelo because he's on UMG. Now it makes sense.
That's gotta be embarrassing and not a good feeling. That would have completely pissed me off. I don't know how Rory just sat there and laughed. I would have pulled this dude aside after the camera started rolling and said, hey, you need to get your shit together. You fucking up the bag. Because I'm pretty sure there's other artists out there that did not come on this show because of how ignorant Maul sounds. I feel like their channel is stuck in limbo. It doesn't seem like they're growing too much either. If I were Rory, I would think about doing something on the side, on my own. Maybe do a weekly, vlog or something on the YouTube, because Maul's gonna be the reason why this channel never brings in bread. He's too busy feeding Drake his hot pocket.
With that said, you're still a rapper, and there's still rapper rules. This is just a straight up defamation case when you asked Kendrick to do that, knowing he was on UMG.
And Rory's absolutely right. How do you claim that this is you, Aubrey, when the whole essence of battle rapping is to defame one another? It is literally obliterating your opponent with wordplay. Battle rapping is a sport. Who can out-rap somebody with words? It kept crime off the streets instead of fighting with fists or pulling out the thumper. Instead of using violence, I'm gonna violate you with wordplay. The whole meaning of battle rapping is to defame. So the irony for you to file a lawsuit under defamation is laughable. And Maul, your loyalty for Drake is dripping harder than a leaky faucet. You can take that however you want, but I think of Cat, and that's disgusting. That's disgusting, man. Do better. You are leaking harder than Cat, looking like a wet Garfield. Drake doesn't want it. Just stop already, gang. Just stop. Somebody get this man some dignity. The way this dude rides so hard for Drake, it's embarrassing enough to make Drake cringe at this point. I'm sure Drake is like, my God, I don't know what's going on with this guy. Why is he doing this, 40? There's no way in hell Drake thinks that's cool. But then again, I don't know, because Drake has said some sus stuff in his career.
Wayne is my favorite person to work with, though, because it's just, Lil Wayne's just too good.
You gotta give Wayne the love.
Just too good.
Drake.
Some sussery stuff in his career, so I don't know. Maybe he likes it. I don't know, man.
skin.
Newark, New Jersey. This gangland of Bloods and Crips sets sit just 12 miles away from the bright lights of New York City's Times Square. With close ties to California and New York street gangs, Newark streets are overrun with over 86 active gang sets. In this video, we'll discuss the gang war raging in Newark, New Jersey between the Sex Money Murder Bloods and the Grape Street Crips. But before we get into all that, please hit that subscribe button and help us get to our goal of 10,000 subscribers. It's the Crime Street Journal. Newark, New Jersey is the largest city in the state with a population of over 300,000. Located in North New Jersey, Newark is home to notable celebrities like NBA Hall of Famer Shaquille O'Neal, music legend Whitney Houston, and acclaimed actor Michael B. Jordan, just to name a few. Historically,
Come on, man.
Newark has played a prominent role in the Black Power movement of the 1960s and was the site for the annual National Conference for Black Power. During the summer of 1967, 158 riots erupted in black communities across America, triggered by the conflicts between black citizens and white police officers. The Newark riots lasted 4 days, with 26 people dying, and was the second to only Detroit with the costliest damages during the riot, estimated at $110 million. The U.S. National Guard would eventually be called into Newark, arriving in armored tanks and other military vehicles. During this time, Newark experienced a national phenomenon known as white flight, with white families moving out of the cities for the suburbs, causing the black population in Newark to grow to over 58%.
Bro, what is
in the
going
decades that
on?
followed the race riots, Newark faced high rates of crime and gang violence. In 2013, Newark, New Jersey had the nation's third highest murder rate, according to FBI data. In 2022, homicides in Newark reached a 60-year low, but residents remain skeptical because many neighborhoods are still infested with crime, drugs, violence, and gang shootings, with over 86 active gang sets in the city. Newark's West Ward and Hooterville section has been ground zero for a war raging between the Sex Money Murder Bloods and the Grape Street Crips. Sex Money Murder is a gang started by Peter Pistol Pete Pollock in the Soundview section of the Bronx in the 1980s. The gang remained a local Bronx neighborhood gang up until 1993, when the United Blood Nations was formed by Omar O.G. Mac Portier, Leonard O.G. Deadeye McKenzie, alongside with Pistol Pete in the Rikers Island jail. With that alliance, Sex Money Murder became sanctioned as one of the original UBN sets. The Bradley Court Projects is home to Newark's Sex Money Murder Bloods. Along with other blood sets, the projects are united under another subset called BCP, Mun Block, or M Block for short, named after the street Bradley Court Projects is located on, North Mun Avenue. The Bradley Court Projects have been such a hotbed of crime and gang violence that the surrounding neighbors have started a petition on change.org to have the projects permanently shut down. The Sex Money Murder Bloods of M Block are rivals to another gang with their own out-of-state ties. G Block is Newark's subset of the Grape Street Crips, who operate in the area of Goodwin Avenue in Newark, New Jersey. The Grape Street Crips is a gang that originated from the Jordantown housing projects located between Grape Street and 103rd Street in the Watts neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. The gang started as the Jordantown Crips around 1973 by a guy named Pee Wee. By 1976, the Jordantown Crips changed their name to the Grape Street Crips under the leadership of Kenny Crow Loco, who was later killed in 1987 during a carjacking in Compton. In the early to mid-90s, two members from the
new season of School Spirits premieres January 30th.
I know what happened to me.
Rewatch the first season now on Paramount Plus.
Did you hurt my daughter?
And relive the mystery that kept everybody guessing.
We can't assume we know everything.
There have been many Robins in the history of Batman and DC Comics in general. Some might say too many Robins. But today, we are going to narrow down who is the greatest Robin.
Yeah, you know, it's not just Robins. Like, Batman's had a freaking plethora of sidekicks at this point.
Like, there's at least 8 right now.
Yeah.
They're all alive and working.
I know. It's gotten to the point where it's just like, it literally is a full Bat family.
Yeah. Ladies and gents, I'm Thomas.
I'm Merlin.
And together, we are the Comic Lads.
For the sake of this video, we're just sticking to the 4 main Robins.
Yeah, sorry. We're not going to talk about Stephanie Brown. We're not going to talk about Carrie Kelly. Well, it kind of seems like we're just ignoring the girls. But we're not. We're talking about the 4 main Robins who have each been Robin for more than, like, 3 issues.
Definitely. Maybe we'll do, like, a different video just ranking and talking about the whole Bat family.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And, like, talking about the history of that.
Yeah.
But for the sake of this video, let's get into the 4 main ones. But before we get started, guys, question of the week. Who is your favorite Robin? We're only talking about the 4 today, but feel free to list any of the ones that have appeared in the past.
Even in other multimedia and different alternate universes, you know, any Robin is at your pick.
Let us know, guys.
And as always, guys, make sure to like, subscribe, click the notification bell, share with your friends. It really helps us a lot.
Hit the subscribe button and join the Comic Lads.
Become a fellow lad.
A fellow lad.
All right, shall we get into this?
Let's do it.
Okay, so we were thinking we were gonna go from...
You guys can't see me, but I just put my face in my head because this is honestly a tough task.
It is. So we were thinking we would go worst to best Robin out of the 4 main ones. Today we're going to be talking about Dick Grayson, Jason Todd, Tim Drake, and of course Damian Wayne. We were kind of having like a debate on who was going to be worst Robin. You think it's Damian. I was going to say Jason just because Jason was Robin for like 10 minutes before he got domed.
I think that's just a personal vendetta for me because I really dislike Damian in all different fucking forms of media, like the comic books and especially the animated movies.
Ugh.
Have done Damian any favors because he's always just portrayed as this like annoying little fucking like just a little wimp, dude. I hate him.
He's young Sheldon.
He's young Sheldon. Like, he's just so cocky and, like, self-righteous.
It's not even that he's cocky. He's just, like, a little, like, dirty rat. He's, like, such an ass.
If you guys don't know about him, a little backstory. Yeah. He's the son of Talia al Ghul.
Yeah, the ill-conceived son of Talia.
Yeah. This is just gonna be a little side rant. You know how I feel about this.
Yeah,
but Grant Morrison is the creator of Damian Wayne. And I read recently, for the first time, A Serious House on Serious Earth, which is by Grant Morrison.
Yeah, you fell in love with it.
It easily became my top 5 favorite comic books ever. The art, the story, the symbolism, you know, the deeper meaning behind it. It was all so perfected. Yeah. And so I went on a little Grant Morrison binge. I might get canceled for this, but fuck, I hate his writing sometimes. And so I picked up Batman and Son, which is by him, of course, and it introduces Damian.
Yes.
God damn, it's god fucking awful. It is just so convoluted, and they make Damian so unlikable.
He is the wackest
character. Where?
Tim Drake, we'll talk about him later on in the video.
He's your favorite comic book character of all time.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite, if not the favorite comic book character of all time for me. And in the story, you know, Damian comes into the picture. And there's this one scene in particular where Damian is, like, getting used to the Batcave. And, like, Tim comes up to him and he's like, oh, hey, like, you know, you want to train together? Like, I know you know, new kid on the block. I'm the current Robin, but I'd love to, like, get to know you. Yeah, and he's like, yeah, you got to get ready to, like, fight crime and shit. And Damian's like, oh, don't worry, I already fought crime tonight. And he pulls out a fucking headless guy that he killed.
No, he pulls out the severed head of like a mugger.
Yeah, and he's like, oh, I already fought crime today, Tim. You're freaking useless.
I really can't hear any arguments that'll tell me like Damian didn't suck when they first made him.
Oh,
he has been a character for over 10 years.
I know.
And they've had him grow. He's pretty likable now.
He is likable now.
I think you can get some great stories out of Damian, but I hate what he does to the Bat family, which is make Tim Drake completely irrelevant.
Because it's also like, for me, like, my headcanon is kind of like Tim, third time's the charm kind of thing, you know what I mean?
He's the good Robin.
Yeah, and it also feels a bit weird because now, like, they're both kind of Robin.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, what's happening? But you do bring up a good point. He is, like, a lot more likable now. And he plays really nicely off of the different Bat family members now, you know, as, like, a kind of little brother of the group.
Yeah, and he's like, he's more of just like a little shit now than like a homicidal maniac that you're wondering why is in this book, you know?
But yeah, just since his inception, I still have those, like, memories cataloged of
Oh,
him being
God.
whack and whiny and, like, you know, super over-the-top brutal.
Yeah.
I do think there's a plus to him being a member of the League of Assassins.
It's another cool thing for when you do Batman Beyond comics, because in the future he can be the head of the League of Assassins, which
Oh,
is
wow.
for sure my
Wow.
headcanon.
Well,
Fucking
actually,
wow.
in Batman and Son, the second half of the book takes such a weird turn. You see Damian is the Batman in the
He's
future.
over-
Yeah,
Tom
Batman
Cruise.
666 or whatever.
Crazy,
Yeah,
bro.
he has that wonky costume.
Yeah, I personally don't really envision him taking over the mantle.
I don't either because he wants it too much. I don't think he wants it for the right reasons.
That's the thing, but, like, even his origin, it just feels too icky. You know what I mean? Like,
Gross, yeah. And it's not
Come
his
on,
fault,
man.
you know?
What
It's
the
Grant
fuck is
Morrison's fault
everybody
and, like,
at,
other
man?
writers.
like we said, there are a few redeeming qualities to him, and he seems like he's a lot better now than he was at the beginning of his creation.
Yeah, much better.
Yeah.
I still kind of hate him.
I do hate him. Yeah,
Yeah, you hate his guts.
I really dislike him.
We aren't writing the 10 Commandments of Robin, you know? This is just like our opinions. After talking about it, bro, I kind of fucking hate Damian.
I don't like him. And I really don't like him in Batman and Son. I could make a whole fucking
Wow.
video just on that book,
Jesus,
dude.
man.
Okay, Jason. Okay, so just quickly getting into the history of Jason Todd as Robin. He was originally introduced after Dick Grayson
That's
stopped
so
being
much
Robin to,
fucking
become
hate,
his own man,
bro.
become Nightwing, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Jason, you know, I guess he wasn't, like, doing that well with the fans. He was kind of a more rough and tumble, like, rough around the edges Robin. His backstory was that he was, like, a street tough who Batman actually caught trying to steal the tires off the Batmobile, and he was like, oh, instead of like beating up this kid, which like a lot of people that don't know about Batman would probably think I would do, let me like take him in and see, you know, if he has potential to, you know, kind of fight crime. But then I guess he wasn't popular at all. DC basically put out like a 1-800 hotline number that you could call, and I think there was 2 numbers. If you called one, Jason Todd would survive the story, and if you called the other, they would kill him off. Oh, we don't know what to do here. You guys please pick for us.
Yeah, it was like them admitting defeat.
Yeah.
They just like tallied up all the votes and were like,
It's pathetic. Why don't you just like, you could have done that for Damian and he would have died because people hated him. So long story short, the calls went in the death direction and he got killed. Joker killed him. Really great, seminal icon.
Oh, fuck.
What happened to connection? It's gone. We get mad if the phone rings. That was invented for talking. Oh, hell no. You got to text me first.
Do you remember Jumper? It's the 2008 sci-fi action film starring Hayden Christensen, who plays a young man capable of teleporting, who is being hunted by a secret society intent on killing him. It's okay if you don't remember the film. It seems to be pretty forgotten in the modern age. In a lot of people's minds, it blends in with similar films like I Am Number 4 and Push, which makes sense, as these are all films focused on protagonists with superhuman abilities that had a lot of potential to be great, but all fell short of leaving a lasting impact. They also all failed to deliver on the film franchises that were teased or promised to us. So in this video, I want to examine Jumper to understand why it never got a sequel and how it wasted so much potential to be great. In 2005, Doug Liman was hired to direct a film adaptation of the Stephen Gould novel Jumper for New Regency Productions. At the time, Liman was probably most well known for directing The Bourne Identity and Mr. and Mrs. Smith, although years later he would also direct Edge of Tomorrow. The Dark Knight screenwriter, David S. Goyer, had written the first draft of the screenplay. However, Fight Club screenwriter Jim Eulers was brought in for rewrites. Later on, Simon Kinberg was brought in for a final rewrite of the script, who was the writer behind several X-Men films and also the creator of Star Wars Rebels. I just want to take a second to acknowledge the level of talent that worked on this film. It's crazy how the end result ended up being so mid. From the beginning, the intention was for Jumper to launch a film franchise, as before filming even started, the studio announced that they were going to develop a film trilogy based on the book series. In 2006, Tom Sturridge was cast as the main character, David Rice. Teresa Palmer was cast as his love interest, Millie Harris. Samuel L. Jackson was also added to the cast as the main antagonist. Principal photography was scheduled to take place, however, it was put on hold when the decision was made by the filmmakers to age up the character from 18 to 25, so that it wouldn't be categorized as a kid's movie. This meant the studio began searching for new actors to fill in these lead roles.
If I actually could have cast somebody who could teleport, I would have done that and not had any visual effects.
Initially, Eminem was in talks to replace Sturridge, and even met with Lyman to talk about the possibility of him starring in the film. However, around the same time, Lyman also met Hayden Christensen, and he knew he had to go with the Skywalker. He said this in an interview with Today. At that point, I had already met Hayden and fallen in love with Hayden. It was one of those things where the studio, with all things being equal, would rather put a bigger name in the movie and wanted Eminem. At some point, I just put my foot down and I said, I love Hayden. Christensen replaced Sturridge just 2 weeks before filming began, and soon after, Palmer was also replaced by Rachel Bilson. Principal photography officially kicked off in October of 2006, shooting all over the world in 14 different countries and 20 different cities, such as Toronto, Tokyo, New York, and Rome. While shooting in Rome, they got rare access to film in the Colosseum. However, as part of the negotiation with the Rome Film Commission, the crew was required to keep their equipment off the ground by using harnesses and use natural lighting for the scenes. Additionally, they could only film for about 45 minutes in the morning and at night, so they did not disturb the public touring of the amphitheater during the day. They also recreated some of the parts of the Colosseum in the studio for the shots they couldn't do at the real location. However, while shooting, they also ran into a few problems. On January 26, while shooting in Toronto, set dresser David Ritchie tragically lost his life when he was struck by frozen debris while dismantling a set. Additionally, one other worker was sent to the hospital with serious injuries. While shooting in the streets of Tokyo, Hayden Christensen suffered several injuries of his own, such as developing a hyperdilated pupil, splitting open his ear, and injuring his hand. Despite all the troubles, the film wrapped in early 2007, and Jumper went off to post-production. By the end of production, the budget was estimated to be about $85 million. With the release of the film, we also got some supplementary media to go with it. A graphic novel was released titled Jumper Jump Scars, which told several backstories from characters in the movie. Additionally, original author Stephen Gould wrote a novel tie-in called Jumper Griffin's Story, which was centered around the character of Griffin, played by Jamie Bell, who was a new character invented for the film. We also got a video game by the same name, which was released on Xbox 360, PlayStation 2, and the Wii. But from everything I saw online, the video game looked pretty ass. Jumper debuted at #1 in the box office on February 14th of 2008 for an opening weekend gross of $27 million. In the US, it made $80 million, and overseas, it made $144 million, for a total worldwide gross of $225 million. Although the film made money, it received some pretty negative reviews. It currently has a 15% critic and a 44% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, with a lot of the criticism pointed at the rushed narrative and underdeveloped characters. But regardless, the film made money. Brothers. And at the end of the day, that's all studios really care about. So why didn't the movie get the trilogy that was originally planned?
Oh my fucking god, bro. Oh my fucking god.
Leaders should attend the Gartner Supply Chain Symposium to get exposed to industry-leading intelligence across the organization to kind of hear their transformation journeys.
You start with the keynote speakers that really energize you and get you excited for the day. And then you have the smaller roundtables and the workshops that you can interact with all of the different people that are in your industry.
This is a great opportunity to meet with like-minded peers and other folks in the industry who are looking for all the different capabilities and features and the latest innovation that is out here around supply chain and operations.
The Gartner conference also offers a good blend between exposure to new technologies and trends, but also training and demystifying some of these buzzwords that CEOs are expecting of us to understand and to really translate into tangible actions and value add for their companies. So that's why we're here.
There are several books in the Jumper series which are direct sequels, those being Reflex, Impulse, and Exo. So that means there was lots of source material to work off of, and naturally, a lot of people assumed Reflex was going to be the next book to get the big screen treatment. As we discussed earlier, the intention of this movie was to spawn a film franchise, and producer Lucas Foster said as much in an interview during Jumper's production. The ideas got so large that they really couldn't fit into, 1 or 2 movies. They needed to evolve over at least 3 movies. So we planned the story out over 3 movies, and then we sliced it up in such a way as to leave room for the other 2 movies. Following this film's box office success, Doug Liman discussed some of his ideas for a sequel in an interview. These include jumpers being able to jump to other planets, jump through time, and even some characters learning how to jump, just like how Millie learns to jump in the book Reflex. 2 years later, in 2010, Hayden Christensen said in an interview with MTV that Jumper 2 was in the works. He didn't reveal when it might come out or if any other actors were returning. He just said this about the direction they were planning on going. Somewhere a little darker. I think there's a lot you can do with it. It was sort of set up in a way that it's going to be mother hunting son and possibly even maybe sister hunting brother. We're talking about it, trying to figure it out. However, after this interview, we had no more news. About a Jumper sequel. That was until 2016, when YouTube commissioned a television pilot of the 3rd book in the Jumper series, Impulse. We never got a feature film sequel to Jumper, but we did get a spin-off TV series on YouTube Premium. Just like the 2008 movie, it was a very, very loose adaptation of the book it was based on. Liman did serve as a producer of the series, and even directed the pilot episode. The series ran for 2 seasons, until it was canceled in 2020. Liman stated he decided to focus on the TV series instead of a proper Jumper sequel because he wanted to do what he wasn't able to do in the film. While making Jumper, Liman's creative decisions were restricted by the studio, and he saw Impulse as an opportunity to address the concept of the book series the way he always wanted to. But I think there's a few more reasons why Jumper never got that film sequel. The reality is, they built the film franchise on a rotten foundation. So in order to correct it, they would need to do too much damage control in the second film in order to get the franchise back on the right track. Although the first film was a financial success, its reviews from casual audiences and fans was pretty negative, which means it's likely a second film wouldn't be as big of a financial success. Although it's hard to believe now since a large majority of people have come around and now love the Star Wars prequels, At the time, Hayden Christensen was pretty disliked. After the prequels, a lot of people were using any chance they got to dunk on him, since he got a lot of flack for his performances in those movies.
No, Anakin, no! No!
In 2010, he wasn't a very bankable movie star, which may also contribute to the studio's reluctance to go ahead with a second film. Lastly, Doug Liman just became preoccupied with other projects he was more inspired to work on. During the time Impulse was released, Liman admitted in an interview with Rotten Tomatoes that he held some regrets surrounding Jumper. It's no secret that, of all my films, Jumper's the one I harbor some creative regrets. Feel like I could have done better. That's something that's hung over me. These regrets over Jumper likely contributed to Liman's reluctance to make a sequel to the film. But what exactly is so bad about Jumper? Well, I'd like to give some of my thoughts on why the film is lacking and where some of the weak spots are.
Is your marketing tech stack stuck in the past?
Indeed it is. Upgrade to Apps Flyer, the world's leading MMP with the most innovative solution.
To me, Jumper could be best characterized as a film that could have been great, but is only okay. I don't hate the film as much as other people. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and would probably rate it a 3 out of 5. I was pretty shocked to see how bad the reviews online were, but after reading some of the criticisms, I totally get it. But 15%? Come on, Rotten Tomatoes, that's a little overkill. Although I enjoy the movie, there are so many changes the filmmakers could have made, which could have made this an amazing film. First off, this film has a lot of differences from the book. Pretty much the entire plot is different, which I know angered a lot of fans of the original novel. But we're not here to talk about the differences between page and screen. We're here to talk about why the film is underwhelming. However, I still want to recognize that changing a lot of the material from the book is what resulted in a lot of the problems that we're going to analyze. One of the big changes they could have made to the film was tightening up the narrative. This is one of those instances where the movie's plot is both rushed and meandering at the same time. The first hour takes its time setting up the world and the characters, and then the last 30 minutes blow by way too quickly. I rarely say this, but this is a film that could have been longer. The jump from the second act to the third act happened too fast, as we could have used an extra 10 to 15 minutes in that area to bridge the gap. Or we could have cut down some of the time that was dedicated to the romance subplot, as overall, that was one of the weakest aspects of the movie. You can also feel this rush plot in a lot of the characters' decisions. Like Griffin and David battling against each other at the end felt really rushed and like they were making up excuses just so that we could see two jumpers fight each other. And then there's the issue of unresolved plot points and characters. Over the film, David goes from hating his dad to saving his life. However, after the scene where he jumps his dad to the hospital, there's no more resolution between the two characters. We never find out what happens to David's dad afterwards, and they don't get a chance to talk face to face again, which I think was a huge missed opportunity. Additionally, after Griffin gets caught up in the power lines, we don't get any more scenes with him or even a clue to what might have happened to him. He is one of the main characters in the movie, and we don't even get to see what happens to him after he gets caught up in the power lines. I get that they may have been leaving this open to explore in a potential sequel, but we could have at least got a proper end to his story in this movie, instead of just banking on the next movie to wrap it up. The filmmakers really should have tied up these loose ends, but they were left wide open and hinder this movie from feeling fully realized. The whole climax of the film was pretty underwhelming. Even though I did like a lot of the action, it was pretty damn cool. But I thought David's character arc was kind of lacking. Yes, he completed the arc of not running from his problems, but there was the whole aspect of him using his powers for good that was never really completed. Like in the beginning of the film, we get a scene of him watching TV, of people stranded and needing help during a flood. But he chooses not to help. And then there's the dialogue Roland had about how jumpers always turn evil and are only self-serving. I totally thought this was planting the seeds that he was going to use his powers for good rather than selfish reasons. But the only good he uses his powers for is for saving his girlfriend. I just wanted a little more from that arc. The jumpers in this movie also run into what I like to call the Flash problem. This is when a character has an ability that is so overpowered that the writers have to bend over backwards in order to manufacture conflict. You see this happen all the time when people write for the Flash, or really any superhero or villain with crazy powers. And you see it on full display in this movie with the jumpers. The writers always have to force the characters to make stupid decisions or come up with BS reasons why they can't solve a problem right away. The last thing that I wanted to comment on that was a huge missed opportunity in this film was the main antagonist. Roland. Not only because they wasted the talents of Samuel L. Jackson, but because his character could have been so much more intriguing. If we got some more character development with him and the Paladins where we could understand more of their philosophy, it would have improved this film so much. Just like everything else in the movie, the concept was there, but the execution was off. And I didn't even talk about David's relationship with his mother in this film, which was a whole nother issue that I'm sure book fans were really pissed off about. After the poor response from the first movie and the creatives behind the scenes reluctance to return to this product on the big screen, the sequel to Jumper slowly faded away. Although we did get a spin-off on YouTube Premium and a horrible video game, we may never get to see what a proper sequel would look like. Jumper falls into the same category that 2011's In Time does. It's a movie that has a really great concept, but a mediocre execution. And it just sucks, because this movie had a super talented crew of writers, and the source material is well regarded, and the director has made great movies before, but in the end, the finished product was still so underwhelming. But hey, what are your thoughts on the film? Did you like Jumper? Did you hate it? Or did you just think it was okay? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. This has been Tom from Eisenhower Productions, and thank you so much for watching. See you next week.
For the ones who get it done, the most important part is the one you need now. And the best partner is the one who can deliver. That's why millions of maintenance and repair pros trust Grainger. Because we have professional-grade supplies for every industry, even hard-to-find products. And we have same-day pickup and next-day delivery on most orders. But most importantly, we have an unwavering commitment to help keep you up and running. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Come on, guys. Come on, man. We getting fucking smoked, bro.
Throughout the last year, I've been rewatching The Walking Dead and making this retrospective series looking at the bads, the highs, the lows, the goods, stuff that really worked, stuff that didn't work so much, and giving a rating to each season. If you've been following along this series with me, then first of all, I just want to say thank you very much for your support over the year, and you'll also realize that I never did videos on seasons 10 and 11, so if you've seen the rest of the seasons, the rest of the videos, feel free to skip ahead and check out those two final seasons, but for everybody else who hasn't been following along each month, then buckle up. You've got an incredibly long video on your hands, so go ahead and grab some snacks, some drinks, get yourselves all nice and warm and comfy, and enjoy my complete series retrospective on The Walking Dead. Given as how there's only 6 episodes to the season, I'm going to go over each of them one by one. I won't be doing this in the later seasons, just highlighting certain episodes and events that happen. But since this is only 6 episodes, and this is the one that started it all, I'll go by episode, and that starts us with Season 1, Episode 1, Days Gone By. Now, there's not much I can say about Days Gone By that hasn't been said already by a lot of people. This episode is up there with, I'd say, like, Lost as having the best pilot episode of all time, and everything else can maybe come close, but it's not as good. By itself, this episode works almost like it's the first movie of a series, and everything that we see is so carefully crafted and written to complete perfection. We get to see everything unfold in front of us, and we are told very little, which is one of the #1 rules about screenwriting: show, don't tell. We see how good of friends Rick and Shane are. We see just how insane the world has become. We see that Shane and this woman are together, and then we see, oh, that's Rick's wife. There's so little exposition and explanation in this episode. Really, the only bits of this is when Rick and Morgan are talking over dinner, and them talking about the world, what's happened, and all of that is necessary to the plot. There can be good exposition and bad exposition, and this moment right here is an example of good exposition. Rick has no idea what the hell is going on. There's this excellent moment when he gets back to his house and he's literally talking to himself saying, is this even real? Am I here right now, and I think that's such a great scene, and it's a quick scene, because if anybody else was in Rick's situation right here, you'd probably be thinking the exact same thing. So when Morgan is explaining what's happened to Rick, he calls the dead walkers. This is the audience learning things for the first time along with our protagonists, and that is usually a good sign of exposition. Bad exposition is when characters are explaining a situation or something that the audience should already know about, but the dialogue is reminding you of what they're talking about.
The clean slate, where you type in someone's name, date of birth, in a few minutes they're...
Light, sweet, made with watermelon seed flour, Simple Mills.
I mean, you might as well just look at the camera and speak directly to the audience at that point. I think one of the reasons why this episode stands out in particular is the character of Morgan. Thinking about Morgan's role in the greater Walking Dead universe now, it's crazy to see that the popularity of this character stemmed from this episode. Morgan wouldn't become a season regular until years later in the show, making an appearance in only one other episode if you don't count the post-credit scenes or the season 5 finale, yet people became so attached to the character of Morgan and they wanted him back. That's because Morgan had his own character arc in this single episode, and he was written to be such a likable dude. There's plenty of examples of great characters that only appear in a single episode in The Walking Dead, and while Morgan doesn't belong in that category anymore, there was a time that he did, and he was far and away the best character during that time that he was in the category. This episode does what all pilots should do, and that's setup. This episode sets up the characters, their relation to each other, their different goals and motivations, and leaves us on a scene that we want to see the resolution of. This is a perfect episode of not only The Walking Dead, but television in general, and it's easy to see why The Walking Dead became such a hit after this episode premiered. So episode 2, titled Guts, introduces us to a whole new cast of characters who would go on to become the beginning of our group of survivors. Glenn is immediately the favorite of these characters. He's the one who saves Rick, and he's incredibly likable and is somebody who the audience can see themselves as. The everyday pizza delivery boy, kinda nerdy, and still sees the bright side of life despite the situation they're in. There's also characters like Andrea, T-Dog, and Merle that would go on to have a varying amount of screen time and importance. But I think what this episode does so well is highlight the survival aspect of the show. They're in a sticky situation with the walkers surrounding them, and you can really feel that tension and that struggle. You feel so captivated in their survival, and even after watching this show many, many times over and knowing that they're going to get out, it doesn't make this episode feel any less tense. It's also funny because our characters get in situations like this countless times over the seasons, but usually they can just run away or find an alternate method of escape. Rarely is there a scene that has as great of tension and buildup as this one does. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. The show couldn't sustain the amount of tension for every single Walker Horde encounter, so they differentiated them from here on out, but it doesn't take anything away from this episode and this escape. In episode 3, Tell It to the Frogs, we shift away from the survival horror of the show into more of the character drama portion that the show would later go on to fully embrace. But it's also not like this came out of nowhere. The first 2 episodes built up this reunion between Rick and his family, and also the drama that would be sure to come of it. We get several reunions early on in the episode. This group that we see Shane and Rick's family have also been a part of is the same group that the characters from episode 2 are a part of. So Andrea sees her sister, Morales sees his family, and of course, the reunion of Rick and his family. This is such an excellent scene and a great payoff in just 3 episodes, which goes to show how great these characters are written because we truly care about the things going on in their lives outside of just killing zombies. But now that we're in this camp, we get to see more of the dynamics and the characters that we've briefly seen already. Shane is the one who's more or less in charge of everything. Dale is the old wise mentor. Carol is the helpless and abused housewife. And we also meet this new guy, Daryl Dixon. and this guy seems like he's gonna be a problem. I hope he's not around for too long. Daryl's introductory scene is actually really great. He wonders where Merle is. Shane steps in to tell Daryl that he's not around, but then Rick steps up because he thinks that it's his responsibility to tell him. This is already changing the dynamic of the group, because while Shane steps in because he thinks he has to, Rick steps up because it's the right thing to do. So with Rick entering this group, the whole dynamic shifts. He brings an old world mindset into the new world, and this gives a lot of people in the group some newfound hope. And very quickly, this group starts to view Rick as the potential new leader. Leaving Merle behind takes a toll on his conscience, and even though he's just got back to his wife and kids, he takes on the responsibility of somebody else's life, even if it means risking his own life. The others, while they may not even realize it at the time, eventually come to learn that this is somebody that they want looking out for them. This whole exchange of power works out great for some people, but not as well for one person in particular, and that's Shane. The dynamic between Rick and Shane is really at the forefront of the story for the remainder of the season and the entire next season, and there's definitely a reason for that. Andrew Lincoln and John Bernthal play off of each other so well and bring so many different levels to each and every scene that they're in. This was also the start of an aspect that I feel is super underrated in the show, and that's the differing opinions of audience members. As this series goes on, this becomes way more relevant, but especially during this episode and maybe the following one, you feel a little bad for Shane. On one hand, you have some people who think that Shane is a rat bastard for getting with his friend's wife when he was still alive, and on the other hand, people saw Shane as a man who was doing everything he could for his best friend's family and happened to fall in love with Lori, but he had every indication that Rick was dead, and he was even being a good, surrogate father for Carl. These difference in opinions between the audience was my absolute favorite part of watching this show as it went on, particularly in the seasons 5 to 6 era. Almost every episode gave the audience something to debate, and I remember being part of those conversations online, even having them with my friends and family, what was right, what wasn't, and that all really stems from the character drama that was presented in this episode. I also have to highlight the writing, not only of this episode, but of the season in general. Whether it be quick and witty remarks, talks of survival between the characters, or even some of the deep and impactful conversations, each and every scene leaves you on the edge of your seat to hear what happens next, laugh at a funny remark, or lead you to care more about the character speaking. This is certainly something that the show loses as the seasons go on and more characters are introduced. They just either weren't as impactful as the characters that were introduced here, or the writing for them wasn't as captivating. And of course, it's always great to see Shane beat the ever-living crap out of Ed. Regardless of everybody's opinions on Shane, we can all root for him here in this.
Gonna eat healthy today. Start with oatmeal. Great. So why don't you feel great? Turns out oatmeal can make your glucose spike, which could actually make you want to eat more. Get the Lingo Biosensor to see what food is right for you. Understand your body with Lingo.
$0 Grubhub delivery fees with Prime. Eligible orders only. Terms and additional fees apply.
Moment. In episode 4, Vatos, we pick up right where we left off in the last episode, showing the effects of the apocalypse and how it impacts different people back at the camp, and the group in Atlanta trying to find Merle and get the guns back when they run into trouble with another group of survivors. Given what the show becomes, the storylines in this episode feel very restricted and almost a little bland, but once again, when you combine the tension of the mission and the excellent dialogue between the characters, this apparently bland synopsis is elevated to one of the best episodes of the season. We also get to see the first group outside of the one that we've seen and just how far society has dissolved. This episode is, of course, a glimpse into the future of the show, where people would become the main threat and zombies would be secondary. The dilemma presented in this episode is a good one. The Vatos want the guns to protect their own, but so does Rick. And it seems that these people aren't the greatest at first glance, threatening to kill Glenn, but then we find out it's the exact opposite. These people are actually just keeping a retirement home up and running, so they eventually see eye to eye. On one hand, this misdirection is really great and makes sense that there would still be some good people left in the world to care for others. But on the other hand, I feel like this card was played too early. Getting to see a nastier side of the world when it comes to humans would be a great introduction to what the world is like now, and we're told that there's been some plunderers that the Vatos have run into, but so far, every single human that we've seen is basically nothing but a good person, maybe outside of Merle. I almost wish that this misdirection of an enemy group of people was saved for later, but as it stands, this is still a great episode. Back at the camp, we also see that being in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by woods, is actually not a great place to hold out, and the group now has to find a new home after an attack that leads to the end of a lot of people's lives. This is also the first time that we see the group full-on fight off a group of walkers. They've only really run away from them before this, and this is also, of course, a trend that would continue in the years to come. In episode 5, Wildfire, it shows us the aftermath of what the attack does to our group mentally, the full change in group dynamics between Rick and Shane, and the conversations regarding where they should go next. This is another episode that highly focuses on the group dynamic and the different personalities clashing in the zombie apocalypse. Things like Rick suggesting that they go to the CDC to get the cure, Glenn yelling that they bury their dead, they don't burn them, and Jim trying to hide his bite from everybody, hoping that it'll just get better. These different conversations and even storylines in the show are clear signs that this is the first season of the show. Bites don't just get better, not everybody is able to get buried, and there is no cure. This episode is really focused on furthering the development of our characters, see how this adversity affects each and every member of the group. People like Andrea absolutely crumble at the death of a loved one, while Carol is not too deeply affected. This is also the first ever scene between Daryl and Carol, which turns out to be a very important friendship that's continued on into present day. In this episode, the group fully embraces Rick's ideology, and the torch is unwillingly passed from Shane to Rick. Shane wanted to go to the military base, Fort Benning, away from the city in hopes that a military base would still have all the supplies that they need, whereas Rick wants to go to the CDC in hopes that it's still up and running and they can get a cure for Jim. I think these two choices perfectly reflect the characters of Rick and Shane at this time in the show. Shane is a realist. He wants to do what's best for them right now, in that moment, the people who are still alive, and go to a place that's proven to have more weapons and fortification. Rick is an idealist. He still has hope that maybe the CDC is up and running and they'll have a cure for this thing, even if that's just a long shot. Ultimately, hope wins out, even with some skepticism from Lori, who maybe thinks that Shane is correct, and this is also set up for how big of a wrench Lori throws in between Rick and Shane in season 2. But the group goes to the CDC, drops off Jim on the way, and we meet Dr. Edwin Jenner. In the season finale, TS19, we see the group enter the CDC, and I've done a more in-depth analysis of this episode in the past, so if you want to hear my full thoughts on that, I'll leave the link up for it in the corner right now, but I have a lot of mixed feelings on this episode. For one, as a season closer, I do think that it was the right direction to go in. The CDC seems like the ultimate best place to be, especially with how it's depicted in this episode, but as an episode that ends a season of a show that would go on for over a decade, I feel like this was too early. Finding out more about the virus, that there's no cure, that there really is no hope in the world, it all seems like territory that could have and should have been covered in later seasons. But as I say that, hindsight is 2020. They had no idea how big of a hit that the show would be, that it would last as long as it has, and I think that the show got progressively better over the next few seasons, so changing all of seasons 2 to 6 just so that way they can go and visit the CDC is not really something that I wouldn't want. But later than that, seasons 9 to 11 could have been interesting if it wasn't an avenue that they already visited. On its own, this is still a great episode. What sticks out to me here is the structure of the episode. The first half of the episode is all about bringing this place up. We walk in, see how great this place potentially is. They all have hot showers, a nice dinner with lots of wine. Even Glenn with a hangover here is better than being out in the world. But at around the halfway mark, we learn more about the virus, test subject 19 being Jenner's wife, and the second half of the episode is all about bringing this place down. The electricity runs out, they're out of fuel, and ultimately leads to the CDC literally exploding and leaving our group on the road. It's a real shame, too, because if not for this doomsday counter and fuel being a finite resource, the CDC would absolutely be the best place to live in the zombie apocalypse. The season introduces us to our group, establishes the world and the rules that it follows, and sets up a lot of plot lines for the future of the show. If this series had not done well and this was the only season we got, it wouldn't even be close to a complete story. I mean, I still don't think we have a complete story even all these years later, but with the storylines introduced here, we wouldn't have gotten any semblance of conclusion. So now I think is a good time to talk about a few of the things in this season that don't really hold up when looking at it in retrospect. For one, I obviously have to talk about the zombies themselves. These walkers aren't even really walkers at all. They have the capability to run at you, to try and climb ladders, and even some of their memory. After the first episode and the first season in general, the walkers wouldn't do anything like this until the back half of season 11. And even that was just to try and call back to the zombies from the first season. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. I know and understand that completely, but it's still just such a strange choice to have the zombies' behavior change so drastically when it was a big focus in these early episodes. I also find it strange that there's so many different names for the zombies, yet both Morgan and the Atlanta Survivor Camp just so happen to call them walkers. Maybe that was their official name when the news first broke out, but I find it awfully coincidental if it wasn't. Maybe that's a bit nitpicky, but there's also a lot of evidence that the show was setting things up that eventually never happened. There's a scene with Rick and Andrea in the store, and they're kind of doing a bit of flirting, possibly setting them up to eventually get together like in the comics, and this scene would have been pointed to as the first initial setup for it, but this, of course, never came to fruition. But there's also an equal amount of setup that eventually did get payoffs. All the Rick vs. Shane stuff, what Dr. Jenner whispered to Rick, Merle escaping Atlanta, all of this stuff does get brought back up, so while there were some training wheels on for this first season, when the wheels came off, a lot of the stuff that was highlighted did come back for the future. This season, and this show in general, is a character drama disguised as a zombie survival show.
Make 2025 the year you make your brand happen. Make open for business happen. Make first sales happen. Make going global happen.
It's always been about the characters and how they navigate this world, not about getting food to survive or finding a good base to hold out in. All that stuff is secondary when it comes to The Walking Dead. There might be an episode 2 about getting food, or it might be a plot point leading to some other storyline, but it's never been the main focus, which I feel like turns some people off when it becomes the soap opera with zombies, as some people so lovingly refer to it as. While the season had a higher emphasis on the survival against the zombies, it's still about the characters. Seeing Rick say things like, "We don't kill the living," or Carol apologize to Ed after he's the one who hit her, and Daryl being really antagonistic towards Rick Grimes, all goes to show where these characters start and eventually where they end up and who they end up becoming. That being said, the season did have an emphasis on two things that the show would later lose: survival and horror. The survival aspects come from the conversations of where to go for safety, traversing the world, and getting rid of the walkers, and the horror, of course, comes from the walkers themselves. While the show would never completely shed these aspects from the story, they wouldn't be nearly as relevant. But that's also not a bad thing. People eventually grew tired of the constant moving from place to place and the cheap jump scares from the walkers, so the show needed to grow in order to maintain its audience. So the show did grow, in some areas better than others, and that leads us to season 2. The first season of The Walking Dead does just about everything right upon first viewing, but in retrospect, it does have some flaws. So because of that, it's hard to give this season a rating. When I first saw it, it was a pure 10 out of 10, but as this video is a retrospective, I have to take the nostalgia out of it, so I'm going to go with the final score of a 9 out of 10. One of the things about season 2 that stuck out to me immediately was how big of a threat the walkers were. The herd passing through in episode 1 was genuinely nerve-wracking and such a tense and excellent scene. One walker was a tall task for Andrea to handle. Rick tells Sophia to stay put so he can take out 2 walkers, which ends up being a very bad idea. But at this point in the show, 2 walkers really did seem like a tall task. Now there's also the sense that our group is still new to this game. They aren't leveled up enough to take these things on with confidence, and getting comfortable and skilled at killing walkers all becomes part of their individual character growth, but there's still the Frank Darabont factor with these walkers. They were still monsters at this point, not just obstacles in the way. The dialogue is all around far superior than the first season. They fully lean into the character drama, which puts some people off because it wasn't the parts of the first season that they liked, but when it comes to the character arcs of this season, it's very clear this was the direction the show was always going to go in. Binge watching this season makes it not at all boring, but I feel like more compelling because the pacing is so much better. From this season onward, The Walking Dead feels like a streaming show, meaning it feels like a show that all the episodes were released at once and it was meant to be binge watched.
My biggest concern when I was thinking of getting Botox Cosmetic was
losing my expression. I wanted to stay Javi and stay me.
the doctor did great at explaining that the treatment plan for me was what I needed.
So I got treated on my forehead,
My crow's feet and my frown lines. I am so happy with the results.
my results are subtle,
I'm still myself.
just with fewer lines.
Talk to your doctor about Botox Cosmetic and whether it's right for you. The effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after induction, causing serious symptoms. Learn more at BotoxCosmetic.com.
In the era of AI, privacy has become more important than ever before, as AI connects and transforms our lives in ways we never imagined.
In a lot of ways, I feel like this season in particular was really ahead of its time. There's a few characters who get an increased role this season, one of which is Daryl. The way they utilize Daryl in this season is excellent, and it's easy to see why Daryl started becoming the standout character and fan favorite. It's super impressive writing because they gave Daryl the only storyline that really worked for him to have, and that's to find Sophia. In the comics, Sophia never goes missing, and there's no such thing as Daryl. So to have such a big deviation from the comics this early on only worked if the audience cared about what's going on, and having this side character we didn't have the greatest opinion of at first go out of his way to search for this girl that really doesn't mean anything to him, means everything to the audience. Daryl doesn't have a ton of lines, doesn't do a lot of talking, but his actions are far louder than anything he could possibly say to anyone. Chupacabra is a particular standout episode for Daryl, where he finds Sophia's doll and hallucinates the vision of Merle as he's injured trying to get back to the farm. He still does some, I'll say, uniquely Daryl things.
Look, he's wearing ears.
But ultimately becomes a very likable character. As the season goes on in the second half, Daryl is used as another wedge between Rick and Shane, because Rick goes to look at Daryl as his right-hand man instead of Shane. Less is more with Daryl. It always has been, always will be, and they really understood that in this season. Carl also has an increased role, playing the annoying kid who wants to grow up too fast, and for that role, I think that he plays it well. His injury is really what sets the season in motion, the reason for them staying at the farm, Shane's derailment, and basically everything else that happens because our characters are forced to stay at the farm. He's a naive kid who doesn't have either one of his parents keep a close eye on him, so this eventually leads him to do what kids do, mess shit up. But honestly, watching this season, I had a lot of sympathy for Carl. He loses his only friend in the world and then wants to grow up to help out the others, but they don't really want him to, so he goes and does his own thing. I think this season sets up Carl to go on a nice character arc of his own in a few years. The seeds were all being planted here, even though they eventually took the character in a completely different direction, but I'll go over that when that time comes. Glenn gets an increased role because of his storyline with Maggie. There's winners and losers in the zombie apocalypse, people who end up better off than they were before, and people who can't handle the new world, and it eventually literally consumes them. And then there's Glenn, the nerdy pizza delivery boy who ends up getting Maggie. Now, a lot has been said about the Glenn and Maggie relationship, about how lucky he is, but those conversations died down over the years because everybody realized that Steven Yeun is a very handsome guy, and Glenn goes on to shed this pizza delivery boy personality. But I need to bring it back up, because back in season 2, this was not Glenn. This was not Glenn, and this was certainly not Glenn. Glenn was each and every one of the lonely nerds watching this show, a character we could all see ourselves as, and for him to get a girl like Maggie, he was a goddamn hero. So for that, I salute you, Glenn. But there's only one reason why this relationship works, and it is believable as it is, and that's the chemistry between Steven Yeun and Lauren Cohen. These two end up becoming such an unlikely yet beautiful pairing, and it's one of the only breaths of happiness in this season, and really for seasons to come. Talking about season 2, I obviously have to mention Herschel, played by the late Scott Wilson. Herschel is easily the best character introduced this season. He starts the season off doing everything he can to help our group, being a man of God and still praying for the world. But as the season goes on, his secrets are uncovered, and we learn that Herschel isn't all that aware of how bad the world is. He thinks of the walkers as people still, and that kind of thinking just ends up getting you killed. By the end of the season, Herschel is a changed man, and even though he's changed his mindset in a few ways, he becomes the moral compass and really the dad of the whole group. Scott Wilson was an excellent actor and elevates every single scene that he's in, and I truly cannot give him enough praise. We get to see a few different flashback scenes from before the apocalypse, which is always cool to see our characters before we really met them on screen and how they eventually got where they are. The first one is Shane telling Lori what happened to Rick while she's waiting to pick up Carl from school. Lori's talking to one of her friends about her marriage with Rick and how things aren't going too smooth. It's really the inverse of the opening scene in the pilot of Rick talking to Shane about his marriage with Lori. But this time it's not like seeing two different sides of the argument. What Rick was saying about how Lori said something so cruel in front of Carl and how he'd never say that was exactly what Lori said to her friend and how she was wrong for saying it. Then Shane shows up, tells her about Rick and how he's been shot, and she realizes that the last conversation that she had with her husband was not a great one, and now she has to tell Carl. We also get to see the first bombing of Atlanta and really how the group all met each other on the highway in the first place. But mostly what these scenes are setting up is Shane's involvement with Rick's family. At the start of the season, there is an internal struggle in Shane. He's in love with Lori, but he also genuinely does care about Rick. A lot of people are under the impression that Season 1 Shane and Season 2 Shane are completely different people, which is true for the most part, but it's not like his character just changes overnight.
Everyone else eats sandwiches and seems fine. But you're not everyone. That sandwich just made you crash. You're tired. You can't focus. But instead of a coffee, try Lingo. It's a biosensor that tracks your glucose, so you know how your body, and only your body, reacts to different foods. It's proof. For you, sandwich, not so good. Sushi, amazing. Try Lingo to see what food is right for you.
You're in this room because you have a talent, not much of a proof, but because you have a community, not because you have one of the wrong talent without hard work, dedication, not passion.
is, but it's not like there's not a reason for his change. When he kills Otis to get the supplies back to Carl, his whole mindset changes. I don't think Shane was mentally prepared for the toll this would actually take on him. He talks to Andrea about this, saying that sometimes you have to live with the choices you make and move on from them, or else you're gonna die. I think a lot of Shane's characteristics and choices this season stem from how uncomfortable he is about how things went down with Otis. It affects all aspects of his life. It further drives him against Rick, furthers his feelings for Lori, and causes the whole outburst at the barn. He knew this group needed a villain, and he was okay with being that villain because he himself felt like the villain. Maybe you think I'm giving Shane too much credit, that he was just insane from the start and the whole Otis situation popped the lid off of that. But if you go back and watch those episodes right after Otis's death, Shane is a changed person, a much darker and lonelier person than he was before, and a few episodes later he becomes villain Shane because he just doesn't know how to process his own decisions. With all that being said, when we get to the episode Pretty Much Dead Already, Shane is 100% correct about everything. The way he goes about it, not so much, but if he hadn't had this outburst and forced everyone to kill the walkers, they would have been dead very quickly. Because Rick wasn't changing a damn thing. Rick, while he had differing opinions than Herschel on the walkers still being people, he was gonna go along with Herschel, bringing more walkers into the barn until eventually this would be the death of all of them. All it takes is one mistake, one mishap, and the barn full of walkers would have escaped and killed everybody if they weren't ready for it. And Rick absolutely 100% would have let this happen. Rick in this season is far too busy trying to please both sides. He wants to be the good guy, the glue that holds everybody together, but Shane realizes that that's not gonna work. When he tells Lori that Rick ain't built for this world, he's not wrong. This version of Rick Grimes would have definitely gotten the whole group killed eventually. But when Shane opens the barn, demonstrates how walkers aren't people anymore, it changes the dynamic of the group entirely. The episode Nebraska showcases this perfectly. The group gets split on what Shane did. Some people like Andrea and T-Dog admire him and thank him for what he did because it was for the better, while others are appalled and think that it was the wrong thing of him to do. Regardless of whether Shane was or wasn't right, he starts causing rifts in the group. And once that starts, it takes somebody who's willing to make the hard choices to bring everybody back together. Enter Rick, We Don't Kill the Living, Grimes, making those hard decisions at the bar later that day. The bar scene is absolutely fantastic, mostly because of how subtle everything is. When they run into these guys, it's not painted on their foreheads that they're bad guys like most of the people they run into later are, but there's a few things that they say about how they haven't had a girl in a while, about how they've had to do horrible things just to get by, that gives Rick the indication that something's off, and he makes a decision that if he had made it literally 1 second later, he'd be dead. This is the moment that Rick stops trying to be the good guy. This is the moment that he stops trying to be everybody's friend, because after this, he has no problem sticking up to Shane, making those decisions that are for the best and keeping everybody else alive. In a lot of ways, Rick's killing and Shane's killing of Otis mirror each other. They both change our characters and prove that it's actually Rick who's built for this world, not Shane. Also, side note, when they get attacked at the bar, Herschel ends up killing one of the dudes in their party. Imagine surviving in an apocalypse for a good amount of time just to end up getting taken out by an 80-year-old drunk guy. Don't know why, but that made me laugh. Now I feel like it's time to talk about the elephant in the room.
At Grainger, we're for the ones who pay attention to every little detail. The ones who fuss, tinker, and sweat the small stuff. Because you know the tiniest thing can make the biggest difference when it comes to keeping business moving. We get it. We're the same way, offering access to product experts to help you quickly and easily find what you need. So whatever your industry, you know you're always getting professional-grade products. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Lori. A lot has been said about Lori over the years, and just about all of it is fully warranted. But also a lot of the stuff with Lori comes from a place of hatred or thinking that the character wasn't all that great, and with that, I disagree. Two things can be true at the same time. Lori can be a terrible mother, a terrible spouse, manipulative and frustrating to watch, while also still being a great character. Watching this again, I think that Lori is trying her best to keep everybody happy and be helpful to those around her. She just goes about it in the worst possible way. In a lot of ways, she reminds me of Catelyn Stark, who does the exact same thing, trying to make the best decisions, but actually ends up making the worst decisions. Lori is a character that actually isn't built for this world. She can't make those tough decisions once she's already in a situation that she got herself into. I truly don't blame Lori for getting with Shane when she thought Rick was dead. I don't. Was it a little early in the apocalypse to totally forget your husband? Yes, it was. But we also don't have any point of reference to judge her on because the apocalypse is the apocalypse. You think you're gonna die like every second of every day, and Shane was there for them. He took care of them. So it's probably just mentally easier to divert your feelings of grief from your dead husband by clinging onto somebody else, especially somebody that not only reminds you of your husband, but is going out of his way to keep you safe. That all makes sense, and I don't blame Lori for that at all. But what I do blame Lori for is trying to please everybody in the second season. Her and Rick are both guilty of this, but Shane says he wants to leave because he can't have Lori and there's no place for him anymore. But she tells him to stay, giving Shane some sort of hope that there might be a future there. Rick kills those guys in Nebraska because they posed a threat, and Lori tells Rick that Shane poses a similar threat, so what's he gonna do to protect his family? Lori thanks Shane for saving her and Carl and says that what they had together wasn't one-sided. Rick kills Shane, fulfilling a request that Lori basically made, and she can't even look at Rick after that. In one of my earlier videos, I forget which one, I said that Lori gets a bad rap and doesn't play Rick and Shane against each other, but after watching this season in its entirety again, that's exactly what she does. But I also don't think it's intentional. I think similarly to Shane, Lori doesn't know how to deal with the consequences of her actions. I think that she was hoping that everything would kind of just go away and all the drama would be dealt with if she kept on playing nice to everybody involved, but that's not how the world works, especially this world. And on top of inciting more rage between Rick and Shane, she can't keep her eyes on Carl if her life depended on her. Lori getting mad at Rick for killing Shane is hugely hypocritical, but the scene also makes it seem like maybe she's mad at him because Carl is the one who actually had to put him down, when she was the one who was supposed to be watching him. She really just never has any leverage in her arguments, and that's across the whole season. I ultimately think Lori was a very necessary character, but it felt like the writers kept on flip-flopping on what they wanted her to do and who they wanted her to be, so she ended up being this hypocritical and aggravating character. The second half of the season and the whole Randall situation is written and executed to perfection. It reminds me of the same storyline from Breaking Bad when they have to decide what to do with the guy who survived and their moral dilemma in the whole situation. It's a storyline that only really works in the beginning of the apocalypse because our characters are struggling to preserve the old world and their old moral compass, but also realize that tough decisions need to be made in order to survive in this new world. 18 Miles Out is the culmination of events set up from the very first episode. Things finally come to a head between Rick and Shane. They fight over what to do with Randall after he says that he knows who Maggie is. Shane thinks that they should just kill him, but Rick says they need to go over a new plan, so they start fighting, but the real reason why they're fighting is a bit more obvious. You know, Shane dirtied their new 2011 Hyundai Tucson. But while this is a good episode, it's also incredibly strangely paced with two
platform. Yeah, walking to the bus now with artists, walking her to the Q train, and then I'm walking to the bus.
very different, conflicting storylines, but Rick eventually gets his way and they bring Randall back to the farm. The conversation about keeping Randall alive really encapsulates the whole season. The debate about morality in this world and how it's changed in the opinion of the majority, how people who are stuck living in the old world aren't gonna last here in this new one. These are all themes that represent this season, and having it all culminate in this moment, this one conversation about a man's life they're so willing to take and the one person who's against it, shows how different the group is now and the path that they're going down. It's also one of the most beautifully acted scenes by Jeffrey DeMunn, and heartbreaking because of what happens a few minutes later. Dale died knowing that the world he knew was gone. Shane's death comes at the proper moment and obviously signifies a great change in Rick. I remember there being talks of a deleted scene or something along those lines of like how Shane's gun wasn't actually loaded and he wanted Rick to kill him, which would have been cool, but I ultimately don't think that was Shane's true intentions. He definitely was there to kill Rick. Having him come back alive and Carl being the one to finally end it was also a great scene, one that, again, had Lori lose sight of her son despite all of them being confined to the house. The Walker herd attacking the farm shows all of them how brutal the world truly is. How they were really just biding their time staying at the farm in this wide open area with no true fortifications. And then we see just how far Rick progressed this season when he says that they are not a democracy anymore, they are in a Rick-tatorship. He's done playing both sides and making everybody happy. It's his way or the highway, and they can either get on board or leave. This is at times great for the group, and other times not so much. But we'll get to see more of that in
Crunchy. Delicious. So good, it's literally nuts. Because they're made with almonds. Simple Mills. Astounding ingredients, amazing taste.
My name is Alfonso, and I got Botox Cosmetic for the first time. The lines that I was concerned the most about were on my forehead. I'm really happy with my results.
Talk to your doctor about Botox Cosmetic and whether it's right for you. The effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
Season 3. I'm going to give Season 2 of The Walking Dead a solid 8.7 out of 10. There's a lot to love about Season 3, but there's also a lot of questionable things about Season 3. I always thought back on this season really fondly. Watching it again, I still have a lot of really good things to say about it, but it's also not exactly the season I remember for a variety of reasons. So I'll be going over different plot points, character arcs, all sorts of things, but let's start off with the first episode and the very first scene. The opening sequence shows us just how much time has passed since we last saw the group. There's obviously the look of them. Lori is far more pregnant than she was before. Everybody's really dirty and grimy, and Herschel looks far different. They even go to show him last because we're supposed to be like, whoa, Herschel really let himself go. But what I love about this scene is that there's no dialogue. They're clearing this house as a unit. They have this trust in each other that wasn't there before, and they have a clear formula for doing these things now. The group is also far more competent now. Even Carl is clearing rooms and making shots that Rick couldn't do in the first season. Gone are the days where Rick runs away from two walkers. Really, anybody in this group can take down anything that comes their way. They find the prison and come up with a plan to clear the walkers instead of just saying, well, it's overrun, better look elsewhere. And they also take the prison in just a few minutes. If this was a later season, they'd find the prison, take an episode to discuss if they want to take it or not. If they can take it, something would happen to prevent them from doing it. And after 5 or 6 episodes, there'd be a cliffhanger on whether or not they actually did take it. But nope, this was season 3, and everything in this 16-episode season is paced beautifully. Rick is immediately a more hardened man. He really can't stand Lori, he doesn't take shit from the prisoners, and killing Tomas because he stands in opposition against him really puts that in perspective. This really isn't the same Rick as the first 2 seasons. This is also the season that Rick really starts to become a great character and leader. at least in some episodes. I also think this
Why
is when
did
Andrew
everybody
Lincoln really
lose
sets
points?
into
That
the
made
role
no
and
sense.
understands the character. Not that he didn't before, because he always did, but it seems really like he's more comfortable and able to play up smaller scenes and put his own spin on the character. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but I feel like the first 2 seasons he was more confined between 2 lines, and now he feels comfortable playing outside those lines, if that makes any sense. Same goes with Carol, who seems to have adapted since we last saw her, learning some of Herschel's tricks about healing and also seeing life the way it is now. She's more confident in herself and her skills and sticks up for herself. She also gets colder and darker as the season goes on, telling Andrea to sleep with the governor so that way she can kill him, and even sticking up to Merle and confronting him about what side he's really on. This is a far cry from the Carol we knew at the beginning of the series, and even at the beginning of the season when the writers were contemplating killing her off. One of the primary characters introduced in this season is, of course, Michonne. Across the first half of the season, Michonne has very few lines. In episode 6, she's one of the featured storylines, but doesn't say a single word. But we also identify with her and support her character because she's the only one who thinks something is wrong with the governor and Woodbury. So the show was really making us support Michonne and go against Andrea. It's easy for an audience to watch a show with all the information and root for Michonne to unravel everything. It's kind of like Character 101, but it's also much easier to look at a character making the wrong decisions and root against them, which this season does at every turn they can with Andrea. I have a lot of thoughts on Andrea. I'll get to more of them later, but as it stands, I think Andrea gets a really bad rap. Not because the decisions that she makes are polarizing, she makes every single bad decision possible in this season, but because I think the writers did her so dirty. She was a sacrifice in this show for more drama, but they knew the audience wouldn't side with her or even root for her or even respect her, and I honestly feel really bad for Laurie Holden, but more on that in a bit. Laurie's death episode is great. I have an episode analysis on it, I'll link to it right now, but this episode is literally just a bad day that keeps getting worse and worse. And it obviously changes the trajectory of the show. Daryl steps up when Rick is going insane from Laurie's death. He immediately recognizes that Rick is losing it, goes out on a run to get baby formula, which I feel like they should have had a long time ago, but whatever, and even steps outside his own comfort zone to become a leader for the group. It's stuff like this that made Daryl become the character that he eventually became and a great replacement as protagonist of the show. One thing I need to bring up in regards not only to this season but the entire show is the makeup and practical effects. This season, they got a noticeably bigger budget, and still a lot of that went to the effects. While there's tons of zombie media out there, none of them look nearly as good as The Walking Dead zombies. That goes from season 1 to the end of the show to all the spin-offs. Everything about the makeup, the practical effects in this show, in its entirety is an A+. Insane Rick is probably my least favorite Rick in the show. He's just a selfish asshole. Might be a comparison that only a few of you guys understand, but it kind of reminds me of the Order of the Phoenix book, because Harry is an insufferable asshole for like half of that 800-page book, and it's this character that you really like and connect with, but can't really connect with at the moment. And that's how I feel about Rick in the beginning of this season. Rewatching the show in its entirety has been such a treat because it reminds me of episodes like the mid-season finale, an episode I've probably only seen 1 or 2 times, and it's absolutely excellent. I'm actually surprised I don't have an episode analysis on it yet, but it's going to be one that I do here very shortly. There's so many different layers to the storylines, and the human encounters used to carry so much weight behind what's going on. This was built up from the 3rd episode of the show when the governor was introduced, and the stakes feel so high because of its proper build-up. There's a lot of highlights in this episode, but one of them is the suspense built up between Daryl and Merle fighting on opposite sides. Daryl has the most interesting story this season that he ever gets the whole show. When Daryl leaves with Merle, there's a noticeable emptiness in the prison. The struggle between wanting to help your brother or your family is very interesting, and it takes a toll on every single person at the prison. The second half of season 3 is nowhere near as good as the first half. A lot of it just feels underwhelming because it's supposed to be Rick versus the governor and all the drama surrounding that, but it just doesn't live up to the expectations set up from the first half. There's some great moments and resolutions like Glenn and Maggie getting engaged and Merle's redemption, and even the episode where Rick and the governor meet and the conversations that play out between them and everyone outside is really excellent writing, but a lot of that tension and suspense is lost along the process. I think the best episode in the second half of the season is Clear, which is strange because this is, on all accounts, a bottle episode. But seeing Morgan again after so long and all the dialogue between him and Rick is so interesting. We also got to see Carl bond with Michonne, which is huge for their friendship. This is also kind of like the first family outing, so for a bottle episode, this ends up being pretty important in the context of the future of the show. Rick's speech in the penultimate episode about how this has to be a democracy shows how different he is from the governor and proves thematically how important the threat he posed actually was. It was the perfect time in the show to introduce a human villain because the world had grown, these characters had grown, and it further reinstates that this show is a drama about characters surviving in the apocalypse, not just a zombie survival show. Rick's internal struggle about trading Michonne over to the governor is another really great bit of writing. Michonne has done nothing but help the group since she arrived, but she also doesn't really mean much anything emotionally to anybody, at least not as much as the other people in the prison. On paper, it makes a lot of sense for Rick to trade her, but he can't do that. That's his humanity right there, and it's another thing that separates him from the governor. So Merle takes it upon himself to do it, but even he has a shred of humanity left and pays for it with his life in what is Daryl's most emotional scene in the entire show. The finale itself is very underwhelming, but also indicative of how the second half of the season went overall. I'd say it's probably my least favorite finale across all seasons. Andrea's whole storyline is just badly executed, and it truly feels like they wrote it to have the audience root against her. She wants to play both sides and expects everybody at the prison to welcome her back with open arms, and after everything she learns about the governor, she still doesn't try to do anything up until it's too late. I felt nothing at her death, and sure, Laurie Holden had a contract up to season 7, but the writers did her so dirty this season that winning the audience's favor back would be too tall a mountain to climb. Andrea takes her sweet-ass time getting the pliers off the ground, having such a difficult time doing it too, and then just kind of sits around when Milton is dying and has absolutely no agency whatsoever. It's infuriating writing, and it's when the audience wants to see your character die. Her death doesn't even make narrative sense. She didn't contribute anything to the war, have them form a truce, absolutely nothing. I think the writer saw an opportunity to kill off a fan least favorite and went for it. Laurie Holden has even spoken out about the writing for her character. She said that it's not the direction that she was told that they were going in, and it's not the direction that she wanted to go in. So overall, I just feel very bad for her. There is an interesting moment in the finale. Michonne asks Rick about why he saved her, if it was just for the baby formula, and he says, "Nah, it must have been something else." Is that some kind of romantic spark between them? I don't know. I'm probably just going crazy. Them together would be a long shot. It probably wouldn't happen for like at least another 3 seasons. So those are my thoughts on season 3. This is actually a bit shorter than I expected, but I've said everything I need to say, I think. I still think this is a really good season, but it's far from the series' best. The first half of the season is like a straight A+, but the second half I'd say is like a B- or C+. So to round all that out, input the equation, carry the 2, I'd say it's like an 8.5 out of 10. Now we get to see what life is like at the prison with the governor gone. Sorta. As much as I liked season 3, it did have a very underwhelming finale and just an underwhelming second half in general, so having this time jump at the beginning of season 4 feels like a nice reset and cuts ahead of the boring parts that we don't really care to see. The first episode is titled 30 Days Without an Accident, and this show's story is practically based on accidents and incidents, so I feel this time jump is necessary for a number of reasons. We see how different characters are from the last time we saw them, how much the prison has changed and grown, and just from an audience perspective, it feels like time has gone on in this world as it's gone on in our own lives. One thing I'm noticing a lot on this rewatch that for some reason I didn't realize the first time I watched it, yes, even with watching every episode twice a week, is how much setup there is for Rick and Michonne. I'm not sure why, but I remember by the time they do get together, oh, spoiler I guess, I never saw it coming. But even all the way back in season 4, there's plenty of setup. I also love how Michonne tells him that he needs to shave because he's losing the war as a joke. But in the trailer, that line was super serious.
Your face is losing the war. You're losing the war.
The first episode really is a happy beginning. Life seems pretty great, so of course they drop us into the story when shit starts to go bad. Herschel gives Rick a speech about being too far gone, that he came back and we all get to come back. All stuff I've heard a number of times before, but in a different episode. I just never realized that these exact lines were said to Rick back in the first episode. With this small time jump, we get several character changes, but the most noticeable is Farmer Rick. But before I get into him, let's go over everybody else. Beth is incredibly cynical. Her new boyfriend dies, and she quite literally doesn't even shed a tear. She's so used to people dying and having to grieve that she doesn't allow herself to open up to anybody anymore. Michonne, on the other hand, is incredibly open with these people now, specifically Carl and Rick, for some reason. She's honestly a very different character from the person she was in season 3, not in a bad or jarring way, but she's just more comfortable now, and the more fun and witty side of her comes out. Carl is more mature now. Sure, he's still a naive kid, but he almost has a more realistic outlook than even Rick does across the first few episodes. He's ready to pull his end of the weight in this group, and he's actually capable enough, physically and mentally, to do that now. Carol has adapted to the world. After almost dying several times now, she's prepared to make the hard choices that nobody else wants to. Daryl has accepted a leadership role. Reluctantly, but still accepted it. He realizes that people around the prison look up to him and feel safe with him on their side. Same goes for Glenn and Maggie. They're pillars of this community now and make sure to let everybody know that they're there for them, but also make sure that their relationship is stable because, frankly, their relationship is another beacon of hope for everybody around. And then there's Farmer Rick. Farmer Rick makes sense given Carl's dark turn at the end of the last season, but I feel like he almost takes it too far, not even being able to kill walkers until a few episodes into the season. Rick has his own new hero's journey in this season. He's Farmer Rick at first, but then realizes that this place is kind of falling apart without him in a leadership role. So he takes it back on. This does make his storyline a little boring in these opening episodes. Yes, it is necessary for him to kind of come out of his shell again and realize he's still needed by this group of people, but that doesn't stop me from thinking that he's still a little boring in these first couple episodes. But in this lawless world, when a crime is committed, especially amongst a strong community, the law is needed. So Rick dons the detective hat and magnifying glass to try and figure out who killed Karen and David. Of course, he eventually finds out who killed them and goes on to make a decision that only a strong leader can make. The whole sickness plotline feels ahead of its time in a way, and I actually think it's a pretty underrated storyline. It's one of the more grounded aspects of living in the apocalypse and still makes for great drama and character development. I think a lot of the disappointment from the story comes from the misdirection from the trailer. I made a whole video about Walking Dead trailers and their use of misdirection if you want to check that out, but this whole plot line wasn't even hinted at in the trailer. In fact, it was the exact opposite of hinted at. It was hidden. For people that don't like the story, that just binged it and never watched the trailer, well, I don't know, maybe it's just a bad storyline, but I liked it. At the end of the day, it is just a reason to kill off all the red shirt characters in preparation for the second half of the season, but it adds some more layers to this world and creates a good amount of tension between the characters. It was also the perfect storyline to send off Herschel to. Herschel's speech about risking your life is one of the best speeches in the show. It's up there with the best Rick ones, Shane's barn speech, and it really speaks to who Herschel is. Yes, he's old, he's very susceptible to getting this disease, but he has the knowledge needed to help out, and he'd rather risk himself going into the sick cell block than his daughters or anybody else he cares about. Herschel doesn't care if this leads to the end for him. In fact, by the end of it, I almost think he wished it was the end for him. He's not able to help or save everybody that he wanted to. He realizes that in this world, his best efforts aren't able to save everyone, and everybody around him that he cares about in this world has somebody else that they care about. Herschel is, in a lot of ways, very much alone. Anyways, somebody have better told Judith about Beth, because that girl literally exclusively has scenes only if she's holding the baby. It was like that in season 3 as well, so Daryl, you better be reading some bedtime stories about the girl that carried her for the first, I don't know, should be like years, but at least the first several months of her life. The first half of this season introduces us to the kids of the prison, specifically Lizzie and Mika. All of the Carol and Lizzie stuff in the beginning of the season really breaks my heart. Carol cares about this young girl and wants to teach her how to survive, but I think what she's teaching her ultimately harms her in the end. I think this is where the writing for Carol differentiates from characters like Lori and Andrea. They had a clear goal in mind with Carol, and although what she's doing is incredibly flawed and ultimately works against her, we can see her reasoning for doing all of this. With Lori and Andrea, we didn't really understand their thoughts because they, quite frankly, didn't make a ton of sense. But Carol wants these kids to be able to take care of themselves, and nobody else is willing to teach them, so she takes that on for herself. While she has the right intentions, it doesn't necessarily make her choices correct in the end. When Daryl, Bob, Michonne, and Tyrese go out on a run, Bob literally almost pulls a gun on Daryl for a bottle of alcohol, and this leads to one of my absolute favorite Daryl moments because Norman plays this scene so well. He's angry and he has every right to be, and he's literally holding himself back from strangling this man. And that's what I mean by Daryl has stepped up to become a leader. I think the Daryl of the first 3 seasons would have killed Bob right here, no hesitation. They're also in a car and they get some sort of signal on the radio. A place that says it's a sanctuary for all, but it kind of cuts in and out. Wonder if that'll ever come back into play. I mentioned it already, but Internment is a great episode and a great send-off to Herschel. Even though there's an additional 2 episodes after this, they're both centered on the governor, and we don't even see our group, so Internment is really Herschel's send-off episode. The Walking Dead always does this, highlights a character in an episode that they're either getting killed off in or the episode right before they're getting killed off in, but this was pretty hidden among some other really obvious character deaths that would come in the later seasons, so it made Herschel's actual death 2 episodes later still very shocking. The governor-centric episodes are great in their own right. I really don't think it needed to be 2 episodes. I think it starts to drag a bit in the second episode, but it's really satisfying to see the governor lose himself and everything around him, and scary to see just how easily he can build it back up again and what he's willing to do in order to get power. One thing these episodes do highlight is how great of an actor David Morrissey is. He was great in season 3, I don't think I mentioned that before, but seeing him lead 2 episodes on his own really gives him the proper time to shine. In the first episode, we think that maybe the governor has turned over a new leaf, and maybe we're going to see some sort of redemption arc. Martinez gives him the benefit of the doubt, and we start to truly believe that the governor is a changed man. But he's not. He's a deranged sociopath, and some things don't ever change. Martinez not outing the governor immediately is honestly up there with some of the stupidest decisions in the entire show. Maybe I understand the benefit of the doubt, maybe, but when he doesn't fit in with anybody around camp and starts looking angry all the time, some red flags have got to be thrown out there, like, come on now, Martinez. In the end, Martinez's trust is betrayed, and it leads to his own death. But if Martinez had been smart and outed the governor right away, we wouldn't have gotten Too Far Gone. Too Far Gone is obviously one of the greatest episodes in the entire show. It really makes up for the lackluster season 3 finale because up until this point, we really hadn't seen an episode like this in The Walking Dead. Having the governor launch a full-on attack that ultimately ends the prison era was not something I expected when this episode first aired. In some ways, you really do think that Rick is going to convince them to live together, and in some alternate universe out there, that is the plot line that happened, and honestly, that's a really great what-if scenario. But the governor's thirst for revenge comes above the wants of his new people. He ultimately goes to this prison to destroy it, along with everybody who took the precious life he had away from him. He doesn't care about these people, but he certainly acts like he does, and that's the important part. He knew he was losing the moral battle, even with his own people. They were starting to side with Rick, so he had to do something drastic to change people's opinions on the matter. He was reminded of the bloody stump out in the woods that said liar, and then makes a decision that proves he was actually too far gone. Herschel's death is surprising, shocking, gut-wrenching, and the show had never had a death like it. Maybe Dale before this, but deaths like Andrea and Lori or even T-Dog never hit as hard as Herschel's death did. It worked super well here, but also led to some not-so-great shocking deaths down the line. The multiple different point of views at the prison battle are all really great, either ending storylines or setting up new ones. Mostly setting up new ones for our group of characters, but this truly was the perfect, tragic end to the prison era and proved, once again, that this is the zombie apocalypse. It's not your typical family drama. The episode after Too Far Gone, titled After, really felt like a glimpse into the future of the show for a lot of reasons. For one, it only features Rick, Carl, and Michonne, another hint towards this future family. Carl is also very heavily featured over an injured and seemingly dying Rick, kinda hinting at what the show would be like once Rick dies and Carl takes over as the lead. Because surely that's what's gonna happen, right? But this is also an episode where it felt like the writers had a solid direction for Carl. They knew what they were doing with him here and how to write him. It's by far the best episode for Carl in the entire series. I also completely forgot that Michonne had a son. Her backstory is told in a really cool way that's unique to all other backstories that we see in the show. One thing I have to mention is the music, specifically the change of music. Starting this season, the music changed drastically to what we had heard in previous seasons. It became less Western and more synth and ominous piano, and I really like it. While the Western-sounding music worked for the first couple seasons, it does start to feel a little out of place in this season, so I'm glad that they changed it. Some people might not feel the same way, but seasons 4 to 6 had the best music in the show, and they were also the best seasons of the show.
Coincidence? I think not!
One thing I thought of specifically during these second half episodes was why they didn't have a plan, or at least a meeting place to go to if they all got separated. When the prison fell, there's really no excuse for them not to have a meeting place for this exact scenario. The same exact situation happened back in season 2, and they didn't learn from that. The splitting of the groups and the subsequent drama it invites is some of the best writing in the show. Second half of season 4 might be my favorite stretch of episodes across the entire series. Tyrese escaping with Lizzie, Mika, and Judith, and running into Carol is incredible for the drama the situation invites. But honestly, I felt really bad for Tyrese on the road with these 2 little girls and a baby. Not to mention one of them is a rabbit-killing psychopath. When he sees Carol, he's so relieved to have somebody else to rely on now, and Carol's kind of taken back because she doesn't really know what he knows. It's a great scene and sets up a great episode down the road. The episode Inmates is such a great paced episode showing multiple different storylines in one episode. Why they ever went away from doing this, I have no idea, because this episode was fantastic. Seeing the different point of views and landmarks that all the characters pass at one point or another but barely miss each other is amazing, and I just love that kind of shit. I also love how cheesy the intro to Abraham, Rosita, and Eugene is. It leads you to think that they might be villains, but when you understand the character of Abraham later on, this intro is hilarious. Glenn saving Tara proves again that he is a man too good for this world. but it ends up doing him great favors in the long run. The way that Glenn finds out about Herschel's death is heartbreaking, and in general, everything that happens in his storyline makes it seem like he's never going to see Maggie again. But this also shows us the strength of Glenn. His determination to find her again, no matter how injured he may be, is one of the many qualities that makes us love Glenn and identify with who he is. Another thing I love about the storyline is Eugene. While he tells the group that he has to get to DC to develop a cure, there's all these hints and clues that make Eugene seem like he's not really in a rush to get there. I wonder why that is. The whole branching storylines and seeing hints and clues of where the others were in different storylines and episodes, and this mystery built up over this Terminus place, there's just something about it that speaks to me, and it's honestly when the show really started gripping me for the first time I ever watched it. The build up to Terminus and how each group gets together, their individual storylines, the Claimers meeting Abraham and introducing that whole storyline. Even the Daryl and Beth stuff isn't horrible like everybody makes it out to be. The episodes with multiple point of views honestly remind me of the early Game of Thrones episodes. It progresses the storylines and each scene was meaningful without having any fat. There's a rule in writing called get in late, get out early, which essentially means to cut out any fat from the scenes. For example, Rick wakes up when the Claimers are in the house and leaves when he sees an opening. We don't need to see Rick fall asleep, see the Claimers find the house, go inside, and then have Rick wake up. We get what's going on without having all that set up. When we leave the scene, we see that Rick has an opening to escape and stop Michonne and Carl from getting closer, so he takes it. We don't see him explain how he got his murder jacket or what happened inside. We don't need to. That's obviously what he's going to tell them, but since we just saw it happen, we don't need to hear about it again. And that's how all of these plot lines are structured. See what we have to, and then cut away when we're done. The later seasons started to lose this rule, which is why a lot of people think they're boring. They also go from showing us multiple storylines to one, which is another issue a lot of people have with the episodes still. The switch from having multiple different storylines to just one doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. While I don't hate the Daryl and Beth episode, a lot of it could have been cut and still kept all of the emotional beats that really make the episode while progressing the other storylines. We haven't seen what Maggie, Sasha, and Bob are up to for quite a while. That could have been included here, along with Carol, Tyrese, and the girls. We don't need to see every single storyline. Episode 10 doesn't have Rick, Michonne, or Carl, but I bet a lot of people didn't even realize that because of the progression of other storylines and how well-paced that episode was. This episode just doesn't feel entirely necessary to have one storyline. If you're going to do that, you better have a damn good reason why. Episode 9 only has Michonne, Rick, and Carl, partly to put the spotlight on Michonne and Carl, but also to keep some suspense about the other people and if they're alive.
Now taxes is getting the TurboTax app. And filing your taxes yourself, 100% free if you didn't file with us last year. Pay $0 when you file by 2/18. All tax forms, all 100% free. Now this is taxes. File free in the app by 2/18. When you switch to TurboTax, do it yourself.
There's another episode that does only one point of view, but it's given a really great reason for it to only be one storyline. But the other side of this argument for this episode is that Daryl and Beth think that everybody else is dead. They think it's just them, so we're right along there with them. It's just us, Daryl and Beth. It's also much cheaper for an episode to only have one storyline and not pay the other actors and get the other locations, etc. And that's the real reason for why there's only one storyline. But the conversations between Daryl and Beth in this episode are all really great and progress both of these characters a lot. The ending is also really fun, brings the themes of the episode together really well. And overall, this episode shows us that Daryl can't remotely handle his alcohol. There's a lot that's been said of Daryl and Beth's relationship. Some people think that it's a brother-sister type of friendship. Other people think that they were setting up an actual romantic partnership. And this was also the time when people thought Daryl might be gay. I think there's good evidence enough for actually all of these theories, but to me, it really does seem like they were setting up a romantic relationship. I think it's why they dedicated a whole episode to them, and I honestly think that was the plan. It's obviously not how it ended up, so it seems much more like a brother-sister relationship now, and that's fine because it's also believable in that regard. But I don't know, I really feel like it was intended to be something else. He literally sets up a date and carries her through the door. Like, come on now. The other episode that only features one storyline is episode 14, The Grove. What I love about The Grove so much, and this whole plot line around Carol and the girls, is we want to root for Carol and what she's saying to these kids to ready them for the world ahead, but we also get to see some insight into Lizzie and her mental state. So we're seeing Carol kind of feed this do-or-die mindset to Lizzie, and it's obviously not helping her, but Carol can't see that because she thinks Lizzie is just getting stronger, and eventually she'll grow out of the whole walkers are still people idea. The Grove is like a film of itself. This could be the plot of an apocalypse movie without all the background layers, and it would still all mostly make sense. But when you have episodes like this in a TV show, an episode that warrants the single storyline because of how it's structured like a movie, you can tell this story in just 45 minutes because it has all these background layers from episodes previous. This is the darkest episode of The Walking Dead, not only because of its subject matter, but because of how well the story had been set up right from the very first episode of the season. It has huge and devastating payoffs, and above all else, shows a darker side of this world that we already knew was very dark. The penultimate episode of the season reunites Glenn and Maggie's groups together, and they march towards Terminus, some magical safe haven that seems strangely empty, but she says we'll make you a plate of food, so that's good. Wait a minute, what does she mean by that? Another thing I have to point out is the dynamic between Michonne and Carl. It's so great, and even though she starts off just being like a friend towards him, Michonne is a far better mother figure than Lori ever was, and I think Carl realizes that. This, among other reasons, is why the finale A is my personal favorite finale of all time. The switch and contrast between Farmer Rick in the past and the present Rick is amazing. It has my favorite Rick Grimes moment ever, and I love how the episode starts off with Rick teaching Carl how to trap things, just to get caught in a trap at the end of the episode. That being said, screwing with the wrong people is such an incredibly lame line to end the season on. Yes, I understand there's a different version, and the television rules at the time didn't allow any swearing, but if they could have somehow convinced AMC just this once to add it in there, it would have been so much sweeter. And those are my thoughts on Season 4 of The Walking Dead. Future Thrifty here, I just realized I forgot to rate this season. This, like I said, has the best second half of any season in the show, in my opinion. The first half of the season is still good, and it also has one of the best episodes in the entire series. Throw in some of my personal favorite moments in the show, and my personal biases for this season, and I'm going to give it a 9. So the first thing I obviously have to bring up about this season is the trailer, because back in the day, The Walking Dead would always get these special extended Comic-Con trailers, and it really started with Season 4, but this season they didn't want to spoil how giant the first episode was going to be, so they, well...
Join us, and you go to Washington and cure this thing.
Let's just say they didn't tell the audience the truth about what was going to happen this season.
Liar.
I made a whole video about this trailer and a couple from the other seasons, but this trailer really went out of its way so that way it wouldn't spoil anything for the premiere, and I think it's worked out in its favor because not only is the premiere one of the 3 highest rated episodes of the show that are all tied for first, but this premiere episode was also the most watched episode in the history of the show. Yes, even above the first episode of Season 7. And it's for good reason that so many people watched this episode and it's rated so highly, because this episode is phenomenal. I still think it's crazy just how far they go in the opening minutes. It's a bit jarring when you're binge watching it coming from season 4, when everything about Terminus was kind of teased, but in the first couple minutes they go full on, they don't pull any punches in what is definitely up there with some of the darkest scenes in the entire show. But I think what is so great about this episode is how there hadn't been a premiere of this level before, both in this show and I'd say most other shows out there. When you compare it to the season opener of the season before, there is a clear winner. Most season openers are in charge of setting up the story of the season, whereas this one was in charge of mostly ending the storyline that was set up in the previous season. Kinda a weird choice. I'm sure it won't be a decision they make again in the future in order to kind of replicate the results of this episode. This episode is almost like if Too Far Gone was the premiere of season 4. Sure, they just handled the governor, but what if after a time skip he came back and the opener was just the prison getting destroyed? We have no clue where they're going from there because it's such a wild card of an episode, and especially an episode to open the season on. That's exactly what No Sanctuary is. This episode highlights Carol in a number of ways. We obviously see what she's capable of doing, but there's also a callback to the episode where she was last with the entire group, because this guy is in the lineup at the trough. I think his inclusion in this episode was there to remind Rick of the last time he saw Carol, back when he had things under control and made the decision to leave her behind. So for Carol to save Rick and everybody else, and for him to ask for her forgiveness, just shows how far both of these characters have come since the last time they saw each other. So yeah, it seemed that Terminus was dealt with after a single episode. The trailer straight up lied to us, so where do we go from here? Well, from here, we get the entire group together, and this is far and away the greatest version of the group that the show ever gave us. While I have some issues with the upcoming storyline,
$0 Grubhub delivery fees with Prime. Eligible orders only. Terms and additional fees apply.
this group on screen, their dynamics, their conversations, it makes everything worth it. On this watch, I found myself caring about each and every character. Sure, sometimes they don't do much, or the writers come up with some storylines that seem a little bit contrived and like they're just adding in stories for characters to give them something to do. But compared to the groups of the later seasons, each of these characters are just so great to watch. Even the lower tier characters like Rosita, Gabriel, and Eugene end up becoming prominent characters in the future, and it's cool to see their origins, especially for Father Gabriel. But this is also the season that Rick Grimes became the best character in the show. And I know that sounds weird to say with him being the protagonist and all, but season 5 Rick took absolutely zero risks. He didn't care about who you were, if you did any harm to his family, if you were even a threat to his family, he took you out. He's almost kind of similar to another character now. And speaking of Father Gabriel, he gives off all kinds of red flags after everything the group has been through. This is heightened by the white cross on the car that took Beth and him being a priest. I mentioned this before, and a lot of people were like, oh yeah, I never made that connection. But that was the first thing I thought of when I saw a priest, and especially the car a few episodes later. He seems to be guilty of something, which he is, but fresh off the heels of Terminus, we think there's something far more sinister up his sleeves. This is part of the reason why Four Walls and a Roof is such an excellent episode. We learn more about Gabriel's backstory and how he really is just a guy that's lucky to survive as long as he has. And then we get the conclusion to the termites, see their full intentions, and see Rick follow through on a promise he made to Gareth. It ends a phenomenally paced first 3 episodes, but this also spelled kind of trouble because the storyline that had been marketed to keep people around was now completely over, which leads me to the Beth portion of the story. I have a lot to say about the Beth storyline, but let's go over the good stuff first. I think there being remnants of a police force trying to maintain their past lives, but also taking advantage of their power is a really great plotline on paper. Beth is an interesting character to be given a full storyline for herself, and I mean that in 2 different ways. She hasn't been given a ton of spotlight in the past, so now seemed as good a time as any to promote her. But that's also interesting because Beth, of all characters, gets put in the spotlight. She gets an entire episode by herself, and when you consider characters like Glenn, Maggie, Michonne, and even Daryl to an extent haven't been given episodes where they're the sole focus, it's just a little bit strange. This felt like the beginning of Beth being given the prominent main character billing in the opening credits, but we all know that's not exactly what happened. So let's go over the bad. Beth wasn't given a bigger role. We spend 3 episodes looking for her, just for her to die when we get to her, making this whole plotline feel like a complete dead end. Did it impact other characters and further their development? Not really. Maggie asked about her sister once, off screen.
She's alive. She's alive.
And Daryl gave an incredibly sad response to her death, but after Coda and like a few episodes later, Beth is never mentioned again. This whole storyline is just a dead end and signified a bigger problem with The Walking Dead, and that's the need to have shocking deaths. The last mid-season finale ended with a shocking death, so this one must have that too. But the shocking death in Too Far Gone wasn't the point of the episode, it was the loss of the prison. The point of Coda was and is Beth's death, and I guess the group having to go back out on the road again? But why? It would be one thing if Noah became an irreplaceable character of the group who would go on to help them in ways that nobody else could, but that's also not what happens because Noah dies this season too. Outside of a few questionable character arcs like Lori and Andrea, this was the first plotline in the show that truly didn't feel like it was necessary. It was a troubling sign of things to come back when the show truly felt untouchable and had everybody on their heels week after week. I like how the group splits back up after the whole Terminus debacle is dealt with. I like there being multiple different storylines going on at once, but this was also the start of another bad trend, having so many different storylines at once with only one story per episode. Sure, they also did this in the back half of season 4, so I guess it actually started there, but I don't know, I liked those episodes and how it was done, but one thing is true regardless of when it started, this is a story pacing killer. End of the 3rd episode, there's a cliffhanger of Daryl coming back to the church with some mystery character. Next week, we get to see Beth with another cliffhanger. Week after that, we see the group that's going to Washington. And the week after that, we're finally back with Daryl, but it takes the whole episode for us to see the resolution to the cliffhanger that was set up 3 weeks prior. This also meant that 4 weeks would go by without seeing the main character of the show. Now I know a lot of people don't have that issue now because the show is streaming everywhere, but the show did come out week to week, and this momentum killer style of formatting was, in my opinion, what truly led to the show's eventual downfall. And these problems were relevant way back in the golden era of the show, in a season that is a lot of people's favorite. Abraham's backstory is one of the most tragic in the entirety of the show, and doesn't really get brought up enough. He saves his family, but they're so scared of him that they abandon him, and then he finds Eugene, who tells him that he can save the world, so Abraham makes this quest his whole personality so that way he can forget the mistakes and the horror of his past. Mix all this together with a character who has the greatest one-liners and really leans into his corniness, and you have one of the best characters in The Walking Dead. Glenn has always been the level-headed character. He's the only one who can get Rick and Abraham to stop fighting, and he's really there for everybody no matter what. But as for Glenn and Maggie together, in the first half of the season, they're really kind of just there.
For the ones who get it done, the most important part is the one you need now, and the best partner is the one who can deliver. That's why millions of maintenance and repair pros trust Grainger, because we have professional-grade supplies for every industry, even hard-to-find products. And we have same-day pickup and next-day delivery on most orders. But most importantly, we have an unwavering commitment to help keep you up and running. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
They obviously have some badass scenes and good moments together, but this was a trend that would somewhat continue. One of them would have a storyline while the other one didn't, and then vice versa, but I don't think either one of them really had a standout storyline during these prime seasons. A lot of their lines come from the unlikely pairing conversations that they have with other group members, or just nice and sweet conversations with each other, but they don't really have anything that makes them stick out. Eugene's lie, and really the buildup of it since the minute he's introduced, is really well done. There's so many different hints and clues to what he's truly trying to do, and it seems really obvious the second time around. I'm not too sure if the first time around I just wasn't as good as picking up on these things, but I didn't realize it. The reveal just absolutely breaks Abraham, and the whole episode is really great. In the episode Consumed, we get to see a lot of Carol flashbacks, some of them from well over a season ago, in locations that The Walking Dead rarely ever revisits, flashbacks or not. This episode also shows us how far the Daryl and Carol friendship has come. They have the reunion in the first episode, their back and forth is incredible, and I also thought that maybe these two could have a romantic moment or two. But ultimately, Daryl doesn't end up with Carol, or Beth, or Connie, or anybody that he's been shipped with. And I think there's something great about a manly man like Daryl, who's ultimately just a soft teddy bear, and is able to have friendships with women without it getting romantic. I like that. Rick and Michonne really are already a team. She talks to Rick like a partner, while everybody else talks to him like he's their boss. She's really the only one who can level his head, but she also supports Rick every step of the way. While their dynamic changes over the next couple seasons, the core of their relationship is their friendship and teamwork, and that's something that's very present here and has been present for like a whole season now. So back to Coda. That episode is the most disappointing episode for me of the entire series. It was the first time the show chose shock value over good storytelling. It also doesn't make any narrative sense. They were trying to give Dawn this like redemption arc, saying she wants to change this place, name Beth as her successor, and for all this development, 5 episodes of it, to end it with Dawn killing Beth, and even Beth trying to kill Dawn, it doesn't make any sense. Is all of their development for the sake of misdirection? I guess, because otherwise it's just bad writing. It feels like 2 different drafts of scripts with different storylines spliced together. It also ends this half of the season on not only a bummer of a note, but a pretty directionless future. I have an analysis of this episode, but people always like to claim that this is a world where anything can happen. But let me remind you, this show is a drama first. This isn't some ultra-realistic apocalypse. Characters wear skinny jeans, they never have to go to the bathroom, they have perfectly white teeth. It's a drama with a ton of good-looking people. It's okay to prioritize the dramatic storytelling over the survival aspects, because this show, hate to break it to you, is a drama first. I always say storytelling is built on coincidence. People don't really know what I mean by that, so let's go over some examples from this show. Actually, just this season. Morgan finding a paper that has Rick's name on it, coincidence. Carol finding and saving the group at the exact moment that they're going to be killed, coincidence. Daryl and Carol meeting Noah, who knows Beth, coincidence. The fire truck arriving the second the walkers are going to get out of the church, coincidence. This group arriving at the hospital right as the other group is bringing Beth out, coincidence. This show, every movie, every story is filled with coincidences. The only way I'd revise this statement is if it was like storytelling is built on luck, because a lot of coincidence and luck do overlap, especially in this show, and there are far more circumstances where the characters are lucky. What happens and what's going on is obviously another really controversial episode. It's also a very strange episode for a mid-season premiere. I remember thinking back when this even came out, I was like, the people who binge this series are going to see Beth's death and then Tyrese's death in back-to-back episodes, and it's going to be quite a downer, and I was correct. My girlfriend said something about how depressing this season has been after watching this episode. But I think the group arriving at the Shire Wilt Estates is a really cool nod to the comics, and I really felt for Noah here. Imagine being away from your family and friends, just thinking every day about getting back to them, just for the place to be completely destroyed. Also, hot take here, but Tyrese this time around is a much less likable character than I remember. Tyrese's whole character is talking about how he lost Karen and how it impacted him. This would be one thing if we cared about Karen, or even Tyrese and Karen, but we saw their relationship in season 4 for 1 episode, and that was his entire personality afterwards. It doesn't do a great job at making me care for him. Also, he knew Karen for what, like a month? A couple months tops? It doesn't make for a compelling character because I didn't care about the relationship. It wasn't built up enough. Also, if she's so important, why isn't she in this episode? He's seeing a bunch of important dead figures, even the governor for some reason, but not Karen. That being said, I do like Tyrese's death and this episode. I actually wish that we got more main character deaths from walkers. It's by far the most likely death in this world, and even if we got some sort of like copycat episodes like this with cameos from previous people, a very artistic style of filming and pacing, I'd be fine with it because this is a great episode. I suppose Rick's last episode kind of took the template from this episode, but that was more of a special occasion. This is also an important episode to show us just how vital it is for our group to find a home. The episode Them shows us our group at the lowest they've ever been. They have to eat dogs, they walk at a literal snail's pace because they're so devoid of energy, and this episode in particular focuses on 3 characters, that being Maggie, Daryl, and Sasha, aka the people who have lost the most recently. This episode is exhausting. You can feel just how beat down these characters are, and these 3 characters in particular have every reason to give up, but they don't. Rick also has his famous line,
Yeah.
Are the Walking Dead.
He said it! And we get a nice cliffhanger ending where some random guy comes up to them and says he wants to help. Oh boy. The whole Aaron plotline is excellent. We, as an audience, have been conditioned to not trust the people in this world, and Aaron comes across as somebody who's too good to be true in this world. So we're right there with Rick and his mindset. Aaron does come across as strangely untrustworthy, which is odd, because watching it with a new mindset and knowing who Aaron is, you see things differently, but I'm watching this show with my girlfriend who's never seen it before, and as soon as Aaron popped on screen and knew all about the group, she said that they should just kill him right away. She didn't trust him whatsoever, and it's truly been an amazing experience watching it with her because that was everything I thought the first time too. There are so many red flags raised. He doesn't tell them the whole truth about Alexandria. There's no pictures of the people, and Aaron ultimately seems too friendly. Episode 11 is all about wanting us to feel anxious and afraid of what could happen, because for a whole technical season of the show, almost nothing good has happened to our group. But this all changes when we see Aaron with Eric. For the first time in a long time, our group has hope, and Rick's expression when they arrive says everything. He couldn't hear anything when they were outside of Terminus, but he can hear, and as they enter Alexandria, we enter a whole new era of The Walking Dead, the modern drama era. Entering Alexandria is so jarring in the best possible way. Even just seeing normal people and normal houses feels so outside of The Walking Dead. We center mostly on Rick and Carl and their struggle to cope under these normal conditions in this episode. Rick loses sight of everybody for like 2 seconds, has a full-on panic attack. Carl's hanging out with teenagers and doing normal teenage things, which must be so strange for him because the last time things were normal, he was probably like 8 years old playing with toys. Their struggle to adapt to this new situation is what makes this episode and these next couple episodes so great. I love the interviews and hearing everybody's perspective on this place, how the group stays together at night, and how this episode was basically framed as if Rick or somebody is gonna find some sort of crack in the system, and while there's flaws, there's never that big twist that any of them are expecting. This place is truly as it's advertised, which brings on a whole new set of problems. Now I'm going to talk about Carol again. We know Carol is a complete badass by now. We know everything she's been through, and the storyline the writers came up for her is incredible. Remember, Carol wasn't around at this point in the comics, so they chose to have Carol play dumb and act like she didn't single-handedly take out an entire community and save the whole group. I love this decision for her character, and it eventually makes for one of the best episodes in the series. Now, the amount of characters that they have to show and introduce and develop definitely becomes a balancing act. When they were on the road, it was less of an issue, but the introduction to Alexandria and so many new characters having to be introduced and share the screen time means that a lot of people are shoved to the side. There were many times where I'll just forget about a character until they're on screen again, and then I'm like, wait a minute, where have you been this whole time? Spend is a really great episode, kinda. It raises the stakes and kind of brings us back to reality a little bit because of how well everything was going for the past couple episodes. We get to see just how different our group is from the Alexandrians now that the dust has settled, and we see very clearly that the Alexandrians' way of doing things just gets people killed and it won't work. But just like with Beth's death, this episode needed a character to sacrifice, so let's start giving somebody a character arc. Noah asking Reg about how to build up the walls, and then let's kill them off. This is the same recipe that the show uses again and again and again and again, and all of that started in this season. With the final 2 episodes, I have a really in-depth episode analysis on it, but I love the dynamic that Rick and Carol have and why they're so invested in the problems with the Anderson family. Carol has a past history with abuse, Rick has feelings for Jesse, and I think everything about this confrontation is great. Rick talks about the broken window theory and how if the windows stay intact, then everything is fine, and of course, when the windows are broken, everything collapses. Does it feel like a typical storyline that we'd see out of most other drama shows? Yes, it does, but I think that this show elevates it because of how many different layers there are to this situation and this world. I've also gone in depth about this topic before, but there are a ton of parallels this season between who Rick Grimes is now and who Shane was back in season 2. So if you want to hear a more in-depth explanation on that, check out one of the 2 videos in the top right corner of the video. The season finale is very small scale in comparison to a lot of the other season finales or even mid-season finales, but I think it's very character-focused and has a lot of different point of views that mix together very well. It's a great paced episode, the plot lines are built up suspensefully, and it all comes to a head. We also get a very anticipated reunion between Rick and Morgan, and I love all of Morgan's scenes and glimpses throughout the season. This is a great cliffhanger to end the season on. We're given a lot of new questions about how things will play out, but it ends the story it was telling for this season. I hope that all future cliffhangers will be just as good as this one, but I suppose we'll just have to wait and see. So is Season 5 still the golden era of The Walking Dead, or is it not as good as I remember it to be? I've been thinking about that question ever since I was making this video and watching the show again, and I still don't really have a good answer. In some ways, I was really disappointed with this season, and with how some of the storylines played out, but then I think back to the first 3 episodes, everything happening at Alexandria, the Rick and Shane parallels, and how this is some of my favorite Walking Dead of the entire series. But this is also undeniably where the writers started struggling. Things didn't play out to a satisfying degree sometimes. There were questionable character choices and deaths, and the pacing in the first half of the season was what eventually would go on to kill the show. But there's a big difference between this season and the later seasons that have all these issues, and that's the simple fact that I care about these characters. I cared about the stuff they were going through, how the situations around them changed them as people, and I have a lot of nostalgia and love for this era of the series when it was on TV. So overall, I'm going to give this season of the show a 9 out of 10. But starting off with episode 1, I really didn't like the whole black and white flashbacks aspect. Starting out real strong here, calling this my favorite season, and immediately going into what I don't like. But especially because this isn't real black and white, like they didn't shoot this in black and white film. They just took the scenes and dropped the saturation down to 0 like this. You can tell this is what they did because the trailer has scenes from the season opener that are in color. It just felt a little weird to me that the show didn't think its audience was smart enough to understand the difference between past and present. A little hint towards how this season in particular would treat its audience throughout the whole season. However, the story presented is really solid. We get to see the direct aftermath of Reg's death and how this affects each character, and more of the much anticipated reunion of Morgan and Rick. There are some nice callback moments these two share in their dialogue, but their reunion is a bit underwhelming. This is something I went over more in my episode analysis, which, upon watching this again, I actually think their reunion makes a lot of sense. These are two very different men at different stages in their life, and yeah, they knew each other at the beginning, but this doesn't necessarily mean they owe each other anything in present day, especially in this kind of world. They don't turn into fast friends, Daryl doesn't get replaced as right-hand man, and for the most part, Morgan and Rick are just kind of around each other for most of this season. Does it make sense? Actually, yeah, it does, but it's still a bit disappointing. And because they didn't form any sort of emotional connection with each other, this spelled certain doom for a plotline down the road, but I'll get there, well, when I get there. Now, the actual main plot with the Walkers that carries this entire first half of the season, and an additional episode after that, is one of the reasons why I love this season so much. Everybody always complains about how Walkers are never a threat in the later seasons, but here they were still presented as a major threat. In fact, this is the last time that they are treated as a major threat. After this, Walkers become obstacles in the road, not something detrimental to their safety in the world, even when Walkers, for some reason, learn to climb and fight back. This is still the last true time that the Walkers were seen as these horror monsters. I love the actual start, like the opening scene and the whole plan going sideways from the walkthrough of the plan. It proves that most of these people truly weren't ready for this mission, and now there's additional factors that they have to take care of, and I think this is far more interesting for the story rather than everybody being completely ready and the plan just not working. This way adds way more stakes to the story while still treating our characters with respect and not just making it seem like they had a bad plan. They had a great plan, but with the mix of it being too early and some other outside factors beyond their control, it forces them to improvise. When the opening scene came on, my girlfriend was like, how did we get here? Did we somehow skip an episode? Because it definitely feels that way at first glance with this mini time jump and Morgan just being part of the group now. But then, of course, it goes back into the black and white, so that way we know that it takes place in the past. The second episode, JSS, shows us what happens back at home, and this is one of my favorite episodes in the entire show. While the boomerang style of storytelling in seasons 4, 5, and 6 get on some people's nerves, myself included, I think that this episode and this whole storyline with the Horde of Walkers actually gives a reason for it. Knowing that the A-team is out there dealing with the Walkers and the B-team is at home makes it the perfect time for the Wolves to strike. Not that they knew that the majority of the fighting force was elsewhere, or maybe they did, but writing-wise, it's perfect timing. We see how weak the Alexandrians really are, and how some of them have taken on Rick's philosophy, but we also unleash the wolf in sheep's clothing named Carol. Some people don't like how Carol is able to just do all these amazing feats, and while it does get ridiculous as the show goes on, something like this is just because she's smarter than the enemy she's attacking. She puts on the wolf's clothing and blends in to attack them. She's not just going all John Wick on them. This also sets up the dynamic that she has with Morgan that would go on for the next 3 seasons. This episode just has perfect writing, and the circumstances around it are amazing. In episode 3, we cut back to where we left our characters in the first episode. The horn is blowing, our characters are retreating and panicking, trying to figure out what to do next and what's going on. We also continue the trend of seeing the Alexandrians not ready for a mission like this, and our group having to simultaneously try and fix the plan while saving the others. And Rick understands this. He knows that the Alexandrians aren't all gonna make it back, and he even tells that to Michonne and Glenn, who don't really want to agree with them, but as the episode goes on, it proves that he was right. The episode starts off with like an entire group of people until they all split up, and a total of 3 people make it back to Alexandria. They try and fix the plan, but in that attempt, the characters make rash and personal decisions, and it doesn't end up fixing anything. We also get the end to the Glenn and Nicholas storyline, a storyline that I actually really like. This whole plotline shows us who Glenn really is at his core. He sees the good in people, and that sort of mindset can ultimately lead to your own demise in this world. Or maybe not. But this gave Glenn something to do in his time at the beginning of Alexandria, his own plotline away from Maggie, and they also kind of do this with Maggie, working with Deanna, but she also gets far less screen time than Glenn did. I have a lot of thoughts on this Glenn fake-out death, but I'll get to that a little bit later. The first 3 episodes of this season are what I believe to be the best 3-episode stretch in the entire show. Each episode just builds more suspense, and the stakes just get higher and higher. I love the dynamics between the characters, the differences between our group and the Alexandrians, and how everything just seems to go wrong no matter what. If this had happened even just a month after Rick took over the place, everybody might have been more ready. Everybody would be more in tune with the plan, and all of this might have gone smoother. Even with the wolves attacking, if the Alexandrians were better prepared, I think most, if not everybody, walks out of this mission alive. So I was excited to see this momentum continue and see more of the stakes being raised. But then episode 4 didn't do that. Here's Not Here is a fantastic episode of The Walking Dead. We all wanted answers to the mysteries of Morgan's backstory and how he came to be the way that he is now, and the answers we get are great. Eastman is a fantastic character, but the issue with this episode is where it was placed. This episode is standalone and entirely skippable. I usually do skip it when I'm watching the first half of season 6. Part of me wants to re-edit this first half of the season into one long, 3 or 4 hour movie, keep the momentum going and not cut away from it, take out Glenn's fake out death, and maybe one day I'll do that. I'm not sure if I could share it without AMC coming from my head, but I feel like that would be a really fun project, and yes, that is my idea of fun. The 5th episode goes back to our primary storyline, but definitely slows things down. I do love Rick's arrival and his speech at the beginning of the episode. They're gonna be back.
They're gonna be back.
But I can't imagine being somebody at Alexandria and having all these new people arrive and all these crazy, terrible things start happening. Like a week ago, they were living peacefully and had been for 2 years, and now a ton of their members are dead. They're being forced to fight for their lives when they were seemingly fine until Rick Grimes showed up. In this slowed down episode, we get to see some minor character progress, like the continuation of the feud between Carl and Ron. It's either in this episode or an upcoming one that they fight, and it's truly one of the worst choreographed fights I've ever seen in my life. We catch up with the rest of the Anderson family, and if Jessie is a hairstylist, why does she give her son the Will Byers haircut? What's the point of your mom being a stylist if you're still just gonna rock with this cut? There's a romance brewing between Rosita and Spencer. At the same time, a romance is forming between Abraham and Sasha. So I wonder if these two will have some sort of mutual understanding and breakup. And honestly, I actually think that Rosita and Spencer look like a nice couple, and she could have actually changed him into becoming a better character. But that didn't happen. Abraham and Rosita don't mutually break up, and this was the start of a trend with really all female characters in this show, but Rosita especially, where if a woman doesn't have a storyline, just pair them up in a new relationship. This is something I noticed watching the series this time around, and it happens over and over and over again. And the writer's treatment of Rosita is far and away the worst when it comes to this, but that's a rant for a later video. Everything setting up Rick and Michonne gets shoved way to the sideline in favor of Jessie, which I can see why they did that. I don't think their intention was to have this woman whose husband was just murdered in another love triangle with Rick and Michonne, but their scenes are cut back by so much that it's really noticeable they had to separate them to further explore the Rick and Jessie romance, which might be a hot take here, but I actually really like them. Maybe it's just because I'm a sucker for this reality TV style romance between them, but I thought that they had good chemistry. I liked the character of Jessie and who she was turning into, and I felt like she was going to be the comic Andrea replacement, which is probably exactly what they wanted us to think for a later bait and switch shocking moment. Episode 6, once again, shows us the Scott Gimple boomerang storytelling at its finest, but this episode isn't actually all that bad. In retrospect, we get character development for Sasha and Abraham. We see the Daryl setup with Dwight, Sherry, and the entire Saviors arc, and I don't think that this episode gets enough credit for that. But I remember first watching this episode, I didn't care about any of this. I just wanted to see if Glenn was alive or not, and now that we're going on 3 weeks of this cliffhanger with no answer, I was starting to lose interest entirely. I still thoroughly believe that a lot of these episodes could have been condensed or combined for greater effect, but this episode also kind of brings a character arc full circle for Daryl, him wanting to go out and recruit people, and when he tries to recruit these people, they ultimately end up betraying him. But it does make me wonder what would have happened if Dwight just accepted this help in the first place. The beginning of episode 7, we return to the scene that Glenn died in for some reason. I don't know why they're making us relive this. It was so hard the first time. Oh, wait, it was actually Nicholas on top of Glenn? So Glenn's alive? Glenn's alive, everyone. So, what was the point of this? This fake out death actually doesn't do anything for the story other than maybe add some more stakes. But it's not like there weren't already sufficient amount of stakes to begin with. Tons of people have died on this mission. We find out that Maggie is pregnant. I guess it's to make us think about how terrible it would have been for Maggie to have this child without Glenn. And now that he's actually alive, we don't have to worry about that anymore. Wait a minute. Episode 7 is all about trying to keep Alexandria together. Literally, but also all the cracks are starting to form and people are starting to turn on each other, get angry with each other, which is pretty symbolic for where this place is as a whole when the wall falls. Episode 8 is probably the most underwhelming mid-season finale in the entire show. It doesn't have a shocking death for the sake of a shocking death, so I guess that's a win. Deanna's death is quite symbolic because the Alexandria she envisioned died this day right along with her, so it's sort of a captain goes down with its ship ordeal. But a lot of the plot lines were still being set up, so they couldn't get the payoffs needed to happen in this episode. We didn't get the payoffs because we spent so many episodes covering only one storyline, and not in the way that was needed like in JSS. But then we get the first official mention of this new villain guy named Negan. It's a strange name, but this is another reason why this is my favorite season of the show. I think the whole build-up to Negan is excellent. I remember the whole time around this season airing and how much all the comic readers were hyping up Negan and all the different casting rumors for him. I think that the saviors themselves, and as they're presented in the back half, are honestly really menacing. They were such wild cards. You never really knew what they were going to do or say, and this unpredictability actually made them pretty scary in a way that was lost later on. Now on to the episode No Way Out, the episode that should have been the mid-season finale, but they wanted to give people a reason to come back after the break, so it wasn't. This is the last of the 3 episodes that are tied for the highest rated of the series, and the more I watch this episode, the more I start to feel like it's a little overrated. The bulk of this episode is actually having to do with Denise and the wolf, a storyline that I feel is alright, but I don't buy that the wolf was changing into a good person whatsoever. It's the last 20 minutes or so that make this episode as highly rated as it is, and I think all of this is done incredibly well. The Alexandrians coming together to fight is really impressive and symbolic. The fall of the Anderson family is done very well and is very tragic. But I do think this episode is the worst of the highest rated episodes. It's still a great episode, I'm not saying it's bad in any way, but just not as good as the other 2. Also, with this being the last episode that is this highly rated, in some ways it makes the show all downhill from here at this point onwards, which isn't that great considering we're only about halfway done with the show. The Next World is a fun episode. There's not a lot of high stakes, and I think it's a good palate cleanser from the previous episode and the whole previous storyline. We also meet Jesus, which sets up a whole new world, and seeing more of the Rick and Daryl dynamic is always welcome. This is, of course, the first episode when Rick and Michonne first kiss and other stuff. And after rewatching this, seeing all the hints and clues leading up to it, I think this is a very earned moment. I remember when I first saw this, I thought it came out of nowhere, but I couldn't have been more wrong. The hints are literally there, like, from their first meeting. From an audience perspective, we saw far less of the Rick and Michonne dynamic this season, but we did see that Rick has come far enough emotionally to be ready to see someone else. In Knots Untie, with the amount of focus on Abraham, it almost seemed like this was the episode he was going to die in. And going back to what I was talking about earlier with The Walking Dead and its treatment of female characters, let's talk about Sasha. Sasha just went through a whole storyline about finding a new purpose in life. She lost her last boyfriend and then her brother and wanted it all to end, but she continued on. So what can they do with her character now? Let's just find her a new love interest with Abraham. Oh, Abraham already has a love interest? Well, let's forget about her, and then eventually we'll just find her a new love interest too. The Walking Dead didn't really know what to do with female characters other than make them love interests. I always talk about how I don't like the character of Rosita very much, and it's mainly because of this. But that's kind of what it boils down to. Maggie and Carol are honestly the only ones with a concrete storyline about something else other than being a love interest. Maggie starts to become the leader of the Hilltop, and that changes everything. Carol does become someone's love interest, but it's not her primary storyline, and the reality of everything she's done in this world just comes crashing down on her, which makes for an interesting storyline, I guess. But even Michonne from this point forward kind of just gets designated to Rick's love interest. Anyways, in this episode, we hear more about this Negan guy and his group of people called the Saviors. Rick offers to take them out because they seem like an issue, and our group has never really come across another group of people that they can't deal with, so why not? But they've also never really gone on the offensive before. And this leads me to my absolute favorite episode in the series, Not Tomorrow Yet. I've talked a lot about this episode in the past, and this is an extremely controversial and polarizing episode. A long time ago, I made a video about how this is the episode when our group became the villains, and some people agreed. Some people said it was hard to root for our characters after this episode, and some people say that the ends justify the means. I absolutely love all the conversation and debates surrounding this episode. But one thing is absolutely certain in this episode: our group does something that they've never done before: attack another group first. And no, those bikers stopping Daryl, Abraham, and Sasha on the road doesn't count, because that was also in self-defense. And this episode changes the course of the entire rest of the show, for better or worse. I find it very interesting how Morgan is against this attack because he thinks that all life is precious and that no one is ever too far gone, so he starts building a cell. Just an interesting decision, not